1 month before the discharge, the world completely collapsed and communication between the base and the outside world was cut off. Not only regular calls, but even emergency communication networks were inactive. Because of this, the troops asked the platoon leader if the unit was still safe at least and how long they could hold out. Fortunately, the unit was located on a high mountain, surrounded by many obstacles, but they were already reaching their limit. Additionally, food supplies were also running out, and in their fight for survival, they made a difficult decision. In situations like these, it is always necessary to maintain proper nutrition and gather as much strength as possible. And the lunch that day had been prepared with a special sauce, a bear stew to boost their courage. While eating, the soldiers debated whether this was truly their only option, as venturing outside seemed like suicide. However, the fact that the food was extremely delicious was what stood out the most. And suddenly, with an unexpected change in personality, Lieutenant Kim dropped everything, saying they needed to leave immediately. Kim shouted that they needed to go out and fight right away, which was the complete opposite of what he had been saying moments earlier. But it wasn't just the lieutenant who changed his behavior, as all the soldiers accepted the command. After all, people need to eat, and there's nothing better than hunting monsters after a meal. The cook of this platoon is Sergeant Shin Young-jun, 23 years old, and he is the head responsible for this completely crazy unit. Later, the soldiers performed exercises in the base's court, and right in the middle of it, an exciting soccer match took place. With the area clear for the goal, one of them got so excited that he pushed his teammate's head. Meanwhile, in a convenience store, a man asked if his colleagues had already heard the latest about the NESPA. The entire platoon was dissatisfied with the lunch menu for the day, but they still hoped that dinner would be better. And from a distance, our protagonist watched everything, a bit irritated, as it was almost mealtime and the soldiers were stuffing themselves with other things. In any case, he knew he needed to take the supplies to the kitchen first, and upon arriving there, he began by cutting carrots with unparalleled skill. But while he was cooking, someone appeared in the room, catching his attention. This was because the squid, the main dish for the night, was out of stock. Obviously, Shin was desperate and recalled that he had repeatedly told his assistant to check the ingredient list properly. Furthermore, the hero still had to deal with an issue from the lieutenant, who refused to eat vegetable tempura, which was supposed to be the side dish. Shin was deeply annoyed but decided to let the squid issue slide. Due to the lack of manpower, the boy was already handling additional kitchen duties. And at that moment, they had no squid for dinner, and Shin still had to change the side dish for the lieutenant. Thus, the sergeant shouted for everyone to hear that they would be changing the dinner menu from fried squid to fried pork belly. Fortunately, they had that, so Shin ordered his assistants to start preparing immediately. And since the lieutenant liked noodles with his meals, it was decided they would make a chicken noodle dish for him. Later, the soccer game continued on the outdoor court. But from a spot very close to the court, all that remained of an unlucky soldier was a puddle of blood and a shoe. And his killer was one of the giant monsters that had invaded this world and was now getting closer to the barracks. Back in the kitchen, the previous assistant handed a soda to the surgeon in an attempt to help him relax a little. And since there were only a few days left until discharge, the boy accepted, saying that with so little time left, everything seemed better. Returning to the conversation, the assistant mentioned being envious of those on leave and asked what Shin planned to do once discharged. However, our protagonist still didn't know, though he mentioned he had thought about learning to cook properly to try opening a restaurant. The assistant, on the other hand, was a bit confused because nowadays the culinary industry was a nightmare and cooking had never been the boy's strong suit. In any case, the sergeant found satisfaction in being a cook in the army, and he liked it when people said his food was good. Thus, the assistant offered him the opportunity to come to his restaurant later to start teaching him a few things. However, the moment Shin hears this, he spits out all the soda. This is because, first, he doesn't like the boy, and second, he has no interest in Japanese cuisine. In any case, Shin thanks him, but he knows that the culinary industry is even stricter than the military, and he doesn't want to follow orders. Changing the subject, the surgeon asks his assistant to bring a few more packs of salt from the storage room. And to the others, he orders them to hurry up and get everything in order. In his thoughts, the protagonist considers that maybe it wouldn't be so bad to gain some experience at that guy's restaurant. But still, he resigns himself to not going because, for him, the pinnacle of cuisine is Western cuisine. At that moment, a desperate scream changes the surgeon's expression completely. He quickly realizes it's the voice of his assistant, Jae Jun-hyuk, and so our hero rushes to help. However, the moment he opens the door to the storage room, where the sound is coming from, he sees the back of something that looks like a fictional monster. And beneath this monster lies the boy's assistant, with an expression of sheer despair. Just the thought that Jae Jun-hyuk might be dead shocks the surgeon. Moreover, this can't be a wild animal, and Shin still can't believe that such a monster exists. For a moment, the surgeon enters a state of denial, but when he sees the pool of blood, he understands in the harshest way that this isn't a dream but reality. The volume of Jae Jun-hyuk's screams draws the curiosity of the other cooks, but Shin knows he must get everyone out of there first. He tries to warn them, but not understanding the message, one of them enters the storage room. Carelessly, he ends up face to face with the monster, which is already ready for its second snack. When the man sees it, he screams in despair. As the group leader, Shin runs to try to make a difference this time. With great courage, he grabs a kitchen knife from the floor and throws it at the monster. But as expected, the impact does nothing to the beast, merely bouncing off its tough skin. Soon, the knife falls to the floor alongside the rookie, who gives up completely. The monster's attention then shifts entirely to the sergeant, the only one still trying to fight. Shin grows increasingly frustrated because nothing he tries seems to work, and now he has to deal with this enormous monster that in an instant charges with a frenzied attack. Even in the worst case scenario, the sergeant doesn't give up, and while quickly trying to hide under the table, he questions how such a monster could exist. Fortunately, the monster isn't very intelligent and can't stop its charge, crashing straight into the wall. But this only makes it angrier than before. The cook from earlier shouts at the sergeant, asking what that thing is, but unfortunately, Shin knows as little as he does. Resuming its charge, the monster uses its claws to cut the concrete table in half, leaving the sergeant completely exposed. It wastes no time and goes for the finishing blow to claim its next snack of the day. At that moment, a large kitchen ladle fills with boiling oil, and the cook from earlier manages to throw it all over the monster. Initially, the beast halts its attacks, making the boy think his attack was successful. He fills another ladle and quickly informs the sergeant of the monster's weakness to high temperatures. With great courage, the cook manages to buy a lot of time with this strategy, and Shin realizes that even though the shell is tough, the monster has a weakness. The hero decides he must warn the others as quickly as possible. But suddenly, just as the worker gets distracted, the monster's tail strikes his face with force. As a result, the boy couldn't withstand it and was hurled far away with tremendous force. Shin grows even more terrified than before because now even the rookie has been killed by the monster. With only the hero left alive, the beast turns its attention back to attacking him, this time with a tail strike. As the attack comes, the protagonist defends his head, knowing the situation is entirely out of his control. Sadly, Shin begins to accept his fate of moving on to a better place, just like Jun-hyuk and the rookie, but suddenly, the monster starts acting strangely. The hero tries to figure out what is happening, but he can't see anything due to the hot oil. However, he notices that the previously tough scales have turned red and cracked. Moreover, the monster's inner flesh is exposed, so Shin thinks it might be possible to fight back. Initially, he will need something to pierce the beast's skin deeply. Thus, he decides to use Jun-hyuk's favorite knife, which is the only weapon available at the moment. The monster, still distracted, makes Shin realize that trying to run would only create noise. In the end, this was a very precarious situation that required great caution, but the sergeant was beyond caring. So, as the monster rummaged through things, the hero grabbed the knife and jumped toward the beast. With great distress, Shin shouted for the monster to die as he stabbed it, and unbelievably, he hit the beast's neck directly. Shin even managed to sink the knife into the creature's flesh, and with blood spurting everywhere, he brought the monster down. At that moment, Shin knew that the monster needed to die one way or another, so he had to finish it off quickly. Without hesitation, he started stabbing the monster's skin repeatedly with the knife. The beast howled in pain and filled with rage over the death of his companions. The hero shouted for it to go to hell. After several moments of relentless effort, Shin, unbelievably, managed to kill the monster. Barely believing what he had just done, the sergeant could hardly stand from sheer exhaustion. At that moment, something very strange appeared in front of Shin, resembling a window, congratulating him on his awakening. Additionally, the hero gained several abilities, including large-scale culinary talent. Later, back at the barracks, everything was quieter than usual and no one was seen on the courts. This was because, apparently, there was another monster, and as Shin walked, all he saw were bodies. It seemed everyone had been affected, and the hero struggled to walk through the forest. Despite this, Shin thought he was going crazy and still didn't understand what was happening. After all, the sergeant didn't know what that monster was, let alone the mysterious message from earlier. It was announced that the global event, Faction War, Together for Survival, would soon begin. Additionally, the system recommended that the hero either create or join a faction, as early participants would receive special benefits. Currently, Shin was unaffiliated, and when he saw the message, he thought it resembled a game system. With that, he asked himself who could be playing this joke on him. But at that moment, the global event, Capture the Flag, began. Shin was assigned a mission to capture and expand territory, starting in Region Rock 17. It was also noted that as the faction advanced, extra special benefits would be granted, though Shin still didn't understand everything. At this point, he wasn't in the right mindset for all this talk, as escaping the area remained his priority. Furthermore, the sergeant wanted to find other survivors because having more people increased the chances of survival. For now, Shin only had a knife, but he decided to scout the region even if he didn't find anything. As he got closer, he started hearing gunfire. This made him think he might be able to find some ammunition and weapons nearby. It seemed that people who had chosen not to face the monsters were now grabbing weapons and heading toward the ammunition depot. This gave the hero a glimmer of hope, but unfortunately, a monster identical to the one he had just defeated appeared in rage right in front of him. And this time, there was no hot oil nearby to weaken the beast. Unexpectedly, a strange light opened a window saying the skill Boss's Eye had been activated. After a few seconds of observing the monster, the window stated that ingredient analysis was complete. The system then informed Shin that he had obtained the beginner-level culinary secret called lizard preparation method. The lizard's joints are smooth and scaleless, providing flexible movement. Thus, it is an ingredient that anyone can prepare provided they know the technique. To begin, it is necessary to cut the respiratory tract and drain the blood. Additionally, if the monster is pierced below the left arm, near the heart, the chances of fully draining its blood increase significantly. Faced with this, Shin feels very confused because all of a sudden, a way to deal with the monster comes to his mind. The beast continues to charge furiously at the surgeon, making him extremely worried. However, Shin now believes he might be able to defend himself if he follows the method from the strange message. And in any case, this is not the time to doubt whether the message is true or not. After a few seconds, the beast lets out a scream unlike anything heard before. Shin unlocked the Novice Dagger skill, with proficiency increasing when using equipment in the dagger category. The attack was successful, despite the surgeon initially doubting he could penetrate the creature's shell. After following the instructions precisely, the hero managed to kill the monster. With the battle over, Shin emerges covered in blood, overwhelmed by the realization that he narrowly escaped death. If the message hadn't appeared, he would undoubtedly have died right there. Suddenly, a strange sensation, as if something were filling him from within, overtakes him. This feeling comes from the system, which is granting new reward points to the hero. The hero's boss's eye skill ensures that no ingredient is beyond his ability to handle. When an entity is classified as an ingredient through observation, it's possible to learn its preparation method and various recipes. Faced with this, Shin wonders if the system is really considering a monster like this as an edible ingredient. Then a window appears revealing a lizard recipe. It states that lizard meat has a mild, rich flavor but can become tough if overcooked, and the blood odor must be removed. The system continues with the cooking method, but Shin tells it to stop. He shouts, questioning whether the window is insane for suggesting he cook a monster that fed on people. Moreover, the surgeon still has no idea what this awakening is supposed to mean. Suddenly, a soldier appears with a rifle, asking who is there. Quickly, he recognizes the surgeon as Shin, and the hero realizes it is Corporal Kim from the supply unit. The protagonist is relieved to see Kim alive, but the corporal asks what Shin is doing there alone. Kim also wants to know what happened to him, but the surgeon changes the subject, asking how the corporal ended up there. Kim explains that he heard voices coming from this direction, but now their priority is reaching the depot to resupply their weapons. After surveying the surroundings, the two rush toward the storage area. On the way, Kim asks about the other commanders, but Shin regretfully informs him that they were all killed. The corporal feels saddened, but the hero insists on not blaming the defense unit. In the end, they were good people, and Shin was the only one who survived the massacre. Upon arriving at the location, everyone is thrilled to see a survivor, and they head straight for the pantry. Faced with this, Shin notices that the soldiers have fortified the defense around the depot. Everyone looks utterly exhausted, and their uniforms are in a completely deplorable state. Nevertheless, the surgeon remarks that being gathered together like this is already quite comforting. At that moment, Shin receives the primate preparation method from the system, a beginner-level secret. Looking at the skill's content, the boy is utterly shocked. After thinking it over, Shin realizes the system is referring to his colleagues. The boy cannot comprehend what the skill is implying. Shifting focus, a soldier asks the surgeon to come in and file a report, making Shin realize that the window can only be seen by him. Inside the depot, Lieutenant Kim Hyuk-seok comments that they are all in dire straits. However, he asks everyone to sit down to discuss things and let Shin choose the seat he prefers. The lieutenant mentions that a considerable number of survivors remain. For now, it is the transport unit's turn to continue checking the list. Regarding the lieutenant, the hero considers him a low-ranking, dirty, and greedy officer. Comments like, I can't eat this, or I'll eat something else later were routine for their cook. However, he always came back at the hardest moments, regretful, begging for a dish to be prepared on the spot. Unfortunately, this man is now the commander of the survivor unit. As for the transport team, Seon-ho is present, but their team leader has, unfortunately, passed on to a better place. Upon hearing this news, the lieutenant questions whether it's really true, and the soldiers' expressions say it all. About half of the remaining soldiers were not originally high-ranking, and now it seems that only those still mentally stable have shown up. Currently, the transport unit has 10 active members, and the reconnaissance unit has 7. Meanwhile, the culinary unit has only 1 member, Shin. Approximately 100 people have managed to survive this disaster, which is essentially half of the total. Regardless, the lieutenant asks to take a look at the list and questions Min-ja about it. Min-ja explains that before coming, he checked with his superior, and apparently, they've lost contact with the rest of the world. Obviously, the lieutenant becomes desperate, but the reality is that all calls are marked as out of service and all emergency channels are offline. The surgeon tried every available means of communication, yet nothing is online. In the end, they are completely stuck. One soldier suggests that it could be a North Korean electromagnetic pulse attack. but the military has shielded protection mechanisms to ensure safety against such attacks. As a result, the soldiers feel as though they're all going to die, and many grow concerned about their families. One of them asks the lieutenant what they should do now, as they're stuck at the unit. The hero notices that everyone is clearly anxious. However, once they have a clear objective to work toward, the soldiers' anxiety will probably lessen a bit. In this context, the commander must resolve the confusion and give orders, as he is the only officer present. But despite everyone waiting for the officer's decision, he doesn't provide any answers. The soldiers begin to grow desperate, as even the lieutenant doesn't know what to do, let alone them. Some soldiers start losing their temper over the officer's behavior, while others try to calm the situation, creating total chaos. The lieutenant, meanwhile, returns to the subject of losing contact. After much thought, he suggests sending some soldiers to the higher command unit to receive instructions. However, the hero immediately interrupts, asking if that wouldn't be dangerous. This unit is located in a mountainous area at an altitude of 1,400 meters, so even by car, the journey will take a long time. Additionally, the soldiers doubt they can survive attacks during a 2-hour drive. In the lieutenant's mind, though, he believes the protagonist is talking nonsense. Even so, he agrees it could be dangerous, but insists it's necessary and possible to use volunteers. Everyone grows deeply concerned about the officer's decision. In the end, he doesn't want to be in command because in situations like this, making the wrong choices leads to severe consequences. That's why he's trying to avoid responsibility by passing the blame to his superiors. This is definitely not the attitude of a commander, and Shin expected better from him. Regardless, the lieutenant asks if anyone opposing his plan has a better idea. If not, he declares they should proceed with volunteers. Naturally, no one dares to contradict the officer, so he announces that the remaining soldiers will stay at the unit until contact is established. Turning to the unit's current situation, the lieutenant asks how much food is left. Young-jun explains that they have enough for 6 weeks, but with the reduced personnel, it could stretch to 2 months. As for ammunition, the unit has combat supplies stored. While not a small amount, there's no resupply coming. Ultimately, the monsters remain a problem, and a lengthy discussion follows on how to handle the remaining monsters in the unit. They also talk about how to manage electricity and water. The goal, however, is to wait for communication from the higher command unit. At least the hero notices that the soldiers have calmed down a bit. But at this moment, the lieutenant dismisses everyone to work on plans for the other troops. The protagonist feels outraged because the most critical matter is being ignored. So he asks if the subject of awakening won't be addressed, but the lieutenant doesn't fully understand. The hero recalls that they were hunting the monsters, which the officer confirms. However, Shin begins to realize that he is most likely the only one who is awakened. In this case, he pulls out his kitchen knife to demonstrate his abilities to the soldiers. Naturally, the lieutenant and the other subordinates grow worried about what the surgeon is about to do. Shin knows he can talk all he wants, but unless he proves he stabbed the monsters to death, no one will believe him. Thinking about the sensation of cutting vegetables, the hero begins slicing through the wooden table in front of him. Then his ability activates and the table is divided into multiple pieces. Everyone in the room is astonished, and they immediately shout, asking how the surgeon managed to do that. Shin explains that after killing a monster that entered the kitchen, he awakened and started being able to do things like this. The lieutenant, however, is the most skeptical, but the hero insists he didn't believe it at first either. Initially, it was hard for Shin to understand how he survived, but now the situation is so dire that he knows he could die at any moment. The number of monsters is also unknown, and there were only 3 days left until his leave. Still, Shin refuses to let these negative thoughts overwhelm him, and as the groups cook, he commits to feeding everyone. He then explains that the unit's first mission should be to awaken every team member. But at that moment, a loud noise is heard and a soldier rushes into the room to report that monsters are approaching. Terrified, the lieutenant asks how many there are, and unfortunately, there are at least 5 nearby. Regardless, they can't waste time now, so the officer orders everyone to return to their positions. The hero begins running, wondering why the monsters are launching so many attacks. Outside the base, some soldiers are already engaging the first monster. Fortunately, the monsters only seem to target areas where more people are gathered. On the battlefield, one soldier notes that it takes an entire magazine to kill a monster, while another warns that they need to conserve ammunition. At least shooting still inflicts significant damage on the beasts. It takes 20 to 30 bullets per monster, and Shin knows they won't last much longer at this rate. Although they still have a decent amount of ammunition stored, the unit will soon reach its limit. After the attack, the leader congratulates everyone and instructs each group to count their men. Unfortunately, 2 soldiers lost their lives in the battle. The hero asks what will be done with the bodies, and a soldier explains they will be buried in a nearby cemetery. Shin doesn't argue but feels a bit uneasy about it. With that, the battle with the monsters ends, and the discussions from the meeting begin to be implemented. First, the group is tasked with sending a support request to the higher command unit and waiting for a response. 2 soldiers volunteer for this group, one of whom assures that everything will be fine if they can avoid the monsters. Additionally, the two will carry a good supply of ammunition, and the lieutenant will provide cover up to a certain point. Shifting focus, Shin considers the need to discuss how to increase the number of awakenings. Among the soldiers, there's significant debate about why no one else has managed to awaken. They speculate that firearms might not trigger awakenings. The soldiers have heard that Shin killed his monster alone, whereas they took theirs down from a distance with bullets. Still, no one can understand if there's another difference. Shin explains that while killing the monster, he felt energy accumulating inside his body. It might be necessary to absorb the energy released when the monster dies. The lieutenant is far from pleased at the idea of having to get so close to a beast. Shin points out the weak spot under the armpit, where the knife easily pierced, as well as their vulnerability to heat. The hero explains that pouring boiling oil on the monster gave him the advantage, but this still means someone has to get very close to the beast, which is extremely dangerous. Nevertheless, they decide it's easier to weaken the monsters with a few bullets first. For this reason, the best plan might be to finish off a monster when it's already at its weakest. To prevent fatalities, the lieutenant orders everyone to sharpen their bayonets immediately. One soldier agrees, stating that a bayonet is much safer than a sashimi knife. This approach seems well thought out, and Tae-jun, though weaker in direct combat, is an excellent strategist. Because of this, the hero calls Tae-jun to eat. Naturally, the soldier finds it odd, but Shin explains that it's better to eat before facing the monsters. Even if no one is hungry now, this soon will be. In any case, lunch is over and it's time to prepare dinner. Shin asks the lieutenant for permission. The lieutenant agrees and assigns 2 soldiers to help with meal preparation. Meanwhile, the team tasked with contacting the main base is drawing closer to their destination. Back in the kitchen, Shin is astonished at how easy cooking has become for him. Initially, he was worried about cooking alone, but now his culinary skill has improved far beyond normal. Quickly, the beginner chef's fried pork belly is ready, and thanks to excellent temperature control, his skills increase. The chef's dedication advances to moderate, and his culinary stats receive another slight boost. It is noted that consuming this dish will increase a person's strength and agility temporarily. However, Shin doesn't fully understand what this increase by 1 means, and before he can ponder further, the system suggests using the chef's special sauce. Suddenly, a strange energy begins to form in his left hand. This energy indicates that by using the skill, Shin can influence the emotions of those who eat the food. At this moment, everyone is panicked and trembling with fear, so the hero hopes this will help them feel a little more at ease. After adding the special skill, Shin is filled with excitement to serve his dish right away. In the cafeteria line, soldiers ask if they can have more than 1 serving. Shin tells them they can eat as much as they want. Still, the hero is unsure if his skill is actually having any effect. After all, it's not like the dish will instantly build muscle or shape their bodies. Naturally, it's impossible to tell just by looking, but perhaps the skill is already working. After eating, one of the soldiers comes over to thank the surgeon for the food. 2 others join in, expressing gratitude because they feel much more refreshed after the meal. The soldiers ask if they can have more, and Shin eagerly tells them yes. Though uncertain about the stats, he thinks that if the skill helps with emotional regulation, it could be a valuable ability. At that moment, another attack on the base is heard from the cafeteria. Unfortunately, the soldiers don't even have time to rest during mealtime. Even at night, everyone rushes toward the barracks, where the sound is coming from. When they arrive, the gunfire stops and Shin begins to wonder if everything is truly okay. Quickly, the soldiers start inspecting the area. Shin steps into the crowd and asks what's going on. Before anyone can respond, he notices Tae-jun among them. He immediately asks Tae-jun what just happened. The soldiers explain that they saw a monster and are following the hero's instructions. Now, 2 restrained monsters remain alive. One soldier steps forward to finish the monster and attempt his awakening. Earlier in the meeting, Shin suggested they should be the first to awaken because others wouldn't be convinced without witnessing the abilities firsthand. This way, it's better to demonstrate rather than make a spectacle every time. Back at the barracks, the soldier finishes off the monster with his bayonet. He successfully awakens as a novice mage with an electric affinity and a thunder ability. Naturally, the soldier is startled when a window suddenly appears before him. As everyone tries to grasp what's happening, Shin asks if he can see the window. After some thought, the soldier's frightened expression shifts to one of pride. He displays his ability while confirming everything the hero said. With the experiment a success, the hero is thrilled to see the boy's newfound power. Shin finds it incredible, though it seems others aren't easily convinced. The hero asks him about his profession, and Hyung reveals he's a novice mage with beginner electric affinity. He explains that his ability is called Thunder, and Shin is amazed to learn that a mage class exists. This revelation suggests that one's profession is determined by their talents. Hyung's ability gained by killing a monster up close solidifies this understanding, even if not everyone believes it at first. Nonetheless, Tae-jun is next and will demonstrate to everyone, so Shin advises him to be careful. He also urges everyone to pay close attention to what's about to happen. However, upon arrival, the situation seems far more terrifying. The fact that the monster is still able to move only makes things worse. Anyway, Tae-jun internally commands the beast to stay still, determined to end it within a minute. At that moment, he places his leg on the monster's chest for leverage. However, this action causes the beast to wake up, and in its last surge of adrenaline, it begins to move again. As it moves, it bites Tae-jun, leaving everyone extremely worried. Even in its weakened state, the monster manages to bite Tae-jun's leg with great force. Because of this, the boy starts screaming in pain and anger. Hyung asks Shin if he shouldn't intervene to save him. Another soldier offers to shoot, but Shin firmly denies the help, insisting that Tae-jun must kill the monster himself. Shin shouts at Tae-jun, demanding to know why he's standing there frozen. Turning all of his fear into anger, Tae-jun yells that he won't let the monster live. His eyes fill with a strange energy, and he finishes off the beast. From a distance, everyone is shocked by this, and despite being injured, Tae-jun manages to survive. As he closes his eyes and reopens them, a system window congratulates him on his awakening as a novice astronomer. Meanwhile, Shin orders a medic to come as quickly as possible. Though they only have a physiotherapist, Shin notes it's better than nothing. In pain, Tae-jun mentions that he also has a cistern window, which makes Shin both happy and concerned. As Shin supports him, Tae-jun remarks that for a monster, its bite wasn't all that strong. In the end, his leg wasn't torn off, so Shin yells for everyone to stay alert and prepare to move once the medic arrives. With that, the commotion ends and both soldiers successfully awaken. Slowly, a force capable of fighting monsters without bullets begins to form within the army. The problem arises when soldiers in the field spread the process of awakening, causing chaos at the ammunition depot. Even so, there are still some higher-ranking officers who refuse to attempt awakening. Hyung, frustrated, yells that he and Tae-jun were also scared before awakening, and that this fear is natural. But as officers, they should set an example, and Hyung is furious at their cowardice. One soldier admits he can't bring himself to kill a monster up close yet. This is because there are no guarantees that accidents like Tae-jun's or worse won't happen. From a distance, some people comment on this man, Kwang Il-jun, from the facilities unit, who is known as a specialist. It's understandable that he's afraid, as Kwang is known for being sensitive to dangerous situations. However, Shin is surprised because Kwang looks like a tough guy, and the hero doesn't want more people refusing to awaken. Hyung gives up trying to convince him, and Kwang, surprised by this, simply thanks him. But Hyung makes it clear that this decision will cost Kwang his position as an officer in the future. Kwang doesn't understand, so Hyung explains that staying in the barracks longer doesn't make anyone a superior anymore. Leadership is crucial, and the leader they need now is someone who has awakened. Kwang decides to reject this, knowing he'll have to live with his choice forever. From Shin's perspective, Hyung is absolutely right. There's no way Kwang can lead on the battlefield after this, even if he's famous for his skills. Accepting his fate, Kwang steps back and Hyung leaves angrily. Shin knows this can't end here, so he asks to speak with Hyung privately. He also orders Kwang to remain at his post for now, which he accepts, no longer seeing himself as a superior. Still irritated, Hyung questions what Shin plans to do, but the hero simply asks him to follow. Later, in a private space, Shin explains that giving up is not an option for the sake of the unit. He acknowledges Hyung's frustration, but insists this can't end like this. Hyung asks what he should do. Shin explains that this isn't just one person's problem, but something that will affect the entire battalion. Many soldiers are likely thinking about awakening right now. Hyung suggests the hesitation might stem from the monsters roaming freely outside. But since some time has passed since the incident, Shin warns that soon some soldiers might start experiencing mental crisis. Hyung, in turn, recalls that they are in the middle of the mountains, and it takes an hour by car to descend, even though they are relatively safe in their groups. This is precisely why the unit hasn't had any deserters yet, but at the same time, people still want to leave to see their families. Naturally, this is a possibility, and if they truly want to survive, the troops need to be strengthened to feel even safer. Given all this, Hyung agrees, but decides to point out that Kwang isn't the only one who is afraid. He knows that if one person manages to escape this, others will also beg for the same privilege. This kind of division between the awakened and non-awakened could eventually split the unit and weaken it. That's why the hero insists that refusal to awaken is unacceptable. In this case, Hyung asks how they will convince the officer. In response, Shin says it's already humiliating enough for Kwang to be disrespected, but even that isn't enough to change his mind. So the protagonist says he has an idea and asks for a little time. Hyung, still skeptical, doubts it's possible, but Shin promises to do his best. The hero then leaves, and from a distance, Hyung remains curious about what the sergeant plans to do. As he runs, Shin reflects that if he had a different role, he might have abandoned the unit and fled. But he's a level 1 novice chef, essentially a support role, unable to fight on his own. To maximize his abilities, he needs to cook better. Shin refuses to let the unit remain desperate and hopeless. He's determined to make it stronger. Returning to the kitchen, the protagonist prepares to do what he does best. With his cooking, he plans to turn Kwang into a true soldier. Without delay, the hero starts cooking, deciding to make a simple fried rice dish. After cutting all the ingredients and tossing them into the frying pan, the dish's stats drop due to the poor quality of the meat. However, the stats increase thanks to the excellent seasoning quality. This dish is tailored for a specific individual, and the system notes that if the target eats it, the effects will be amplified. Finally, the chef's special sauce is added, Shin's ability to influence the emotions of those who eat his food. Confident this will work, Shin later asks someone to call Kwang to the cafeteria. When Kwang arrives, the hero serves him the special meal, leaving the ex-officer confused. To explain, Shin excuses himself by saying Kwang rarely comes to eat, so he decided to do something nice for him. Looking at the beautifully prepared dish, Kwang sees no reason to refuse. This was chicken fried rice with courage-enhancing properties, and Shin was pleased, knowing he had done his best. With each bite, Kwang praises the food, and Shin encourages him to eat as much as he likes. After all, their conversation would only happen once Kwang was completely full. After some time, the former coward apologizes to the surgeon, admitting that he was simply scared. He confesses that he's been this way since childhood and was always told to act like a man. People told him to work out to gain confidence, so he started training and practicing martial arts, but it didn't help. Shin logically understands that Kwang likely struggled with his personality. Continuing his confession, Kwang explains that he always took on extra tasks to avoid being a burden to others. He thought he was lucky because people genuinely recognized his efforts, but he never imagined something like this would happen. Unlike him, however, Kwang acknowledges that Shin fought a monster even after witnessing his comrades being killed. The hero doesn't pretend to be unshaken and admits that he was scared too. However, he knew that if they did nothing, everyone would just become food for the monsters. In Shin's case, he mustered all the courage he had to avenge his comrades. It only lasted for a brief moment, but the hero's survival instinct drove him forward. Moreover, Shin is in his prime and doesn't think it's fair to die like this. The protagonist still dreams of leaving the barracks and opening a restaurant even under these dire circumstances. The boy understands that everything so far has required immense courage on his part, but he wants to survive with everyone, and the veterans feel the same way. With this, Kwang is filled with confidence and shouts that he wants to do what needs to be done as well. Shin, in turn, begins to think the food's effect must have worked because the officer's demeanor seems entirely different. Without hesitation, Kwang, with those same confident eyes, asks to be the next one to finish off a monster. Later, at the barracks, the officer punches the monster in the stomach and shouts for no one to help him. He declares that the opportunity to test his courage has finally come. Naturally, everyone thinks the officer has lost his mind, as the monster isn't even unconscious and Kwang is fighting it barehanded. Kim questions what the protagonist did to make Kwang like this and asks if Shin will stop him. After observing the result of his skill, Shin begins to agree that Kwang might indeed be overly aggressive, but he believes it's better to wait and see than to lose this opportunity. Obviously, Hyung doesn't like this idea at all, but Shin assures him they'll intervene if necessary. After taking quite a beating, the monster retaliates with its sharp claws. However, Kwang isn't fazed at all and intercepts the attack with an elbow strike. The officer shouts his own name with even more confidence and rage. Now all the soldiers are getting excited by Kwang's performance, amazed that he's proving stronger than the monster. Even Hyun, who was against the idea, is now eager to see what kind of ability the big man will awaken. At that moment, a soldier calls Shin's attention to what's happening. Kwang bites the monster's arm and tears off a piece like a wild animal. The atmosphere of excitement among the soldiers quickly shifts to concern. Hyun yells, asking what the officer is doing, but Kwang nonchalantly says he didn't do anything unusual. Shin starts to wonder if he might have used too much special sauce, though he had no idea it would work this well. By this point, Kwang is finishing off the monster, and his brutal fighting style prompts Hyun to declare that the real monster is Kwang. Ignoring everyone's opinions, Kwang grabs a rock and continues his task, leaving everyone in shock. He finishes the monster by driving the rock into its head. As the monster dies, the system's light appears for Kwang, congratulating him on his awakening. For several seconds, everyone is silent, and then Kwang breaks the tension with a hearty laugh. He announces that he can now see the system's blue panel in front of him. The soldiers seize the moment to celebrate with their superior, congratulating him on his awakening. Even Hyun feels relieved and congratulates Kwang despite how much he scared everyone. For the recruits, it was the best unarmed fight they'd ever seen. However, Kwang's expression remains far from friendly for such a warm reception. Despite this, he thanks Sergeant Shin, but Hyun becomes uneasy again around the officer. Faced with all of this, Shin decides he'll be more cautious the next time he cooks. Inevitably, the protagonist is questioned about what he did to make the officer so different from before. Shin replies that he just gave him something to eat and had a conversation, leaving Hyun impressed with his persuasive skills. Still, Shin notes that this is simply how the human heart works. Hyun asks if convincing others will always be this easy. Shin merely smiles, saying that no one can ignore the power of being heard. Of course, Hyun isn't entirely convinced, and Shin himself knows his explanation makes no sense. After all, it all happened because of his skill, which he still couldn't reveal. This time was different from when he demonstrated his strength with a kitchen knife. After seeing Kwang behave so terrifyingly, it makes sense to say he underwent a temporary personality shift. Thus, Shin realizes his skill could be quite dangerous if misused. Changing the subject, the protagonist reflects that having such a gentle man turn into a berserk could be problematic. However, Hyun disagrees, pointing out that right now, everyone's survival is at stake. Regardless, Shin asks his colleague to send all awakened soldiers to the kitchen later so he can prepare a good meal for them. But Hyun questions whether they can afford to do this, given the battalion's limited food supplies. Shin explains that more than half of the remaining provisions consist of preserved emergency rations. Therefore, all perishable items must be consumed promptly before they spoil. Moreover, the surgeon himself is eagerly counting down the days until he can enjoy a proper meal again. However, Shin is genuinely concerned about whether his abilities will be effective with emergency rations, as they require no preparation process. Back at the barracks, one of the beasts is frantically running while being chased. The soldiers are attempting to corner the monster in a section of the base. Although there are exceptions, Shin generally observes that the awakened personnel are performing effectively. However, at this moment, one of the monsters intended as a target for Awakening is killed prematurely, prompting an intense argument between Hyung and his unit. This incident slightly alters Shin's earlier perception that everyone was working cohesively. The most pressing issue now is that it is challenging to bring a monster close enough for someone to deliver the final blow. The monsters exhibit significant resilience, often becoming more enraged as they near death. In this context, the awakening process must be executed with precision, and the brigade cannot afford to rush. Later, word spreads among the soldiers that Shin has successfully restrained one of the monsters. Hyung is visibly excited, pleased that someone is finally handling the process correctly. Upon arrival, the soldiers find that the surgeon has indeed prepared the ideal setup for an awakening. Hyung notes that they now only need someone to finish off the restrained monster. As the next individual on the list for awakening, Mr. Hyuk from the transport unit is summoned. Without hesitation, Hyuk accepts the order from his superior. Hyung asks if Hyuk feels confident and advises him to target the monster's armpit for a clean kill. Having trained extensively for this moment, Hyuk delivers a single decisive blow that kills the beast instantly. At that moment, the familiar blue system panel appears before him, and he excitedly announces that he is awakened as a sharpshooter. This brings the number of awakened soldiers to 5, prompting Shin to inquire if Hyuk's class is similar to that of a sniper. At this juncture, several other system windows appear, causing Hyuk visible concern. He promptly informs the surgeon about the messages and mentions a strange phrase he just encountered. The phrase pertains to the formation of a faction, which has now appeared to all the awakened individuals. With 5 being the minimum required to form a group, the hero has now established the first faction in Region Rock 17. However, Shin admits he still does not fully understand the implications of these messages. When Hyuk achieved his awakening, the same system notification was sent to all players. Additionally, a congratulatory achievement appeared, commending them for forming a faction faster than most. Due to securing 3rd place, they were awarded a bonus of 10 growth elixirs. These elixirs temporarily enhance experience gained by 500%. Returning to reality, the soldiers ask about the next course of action, prompting Shin to call for a meeting with all awakened individuals. During the emergency meeting, Hyung comments that the situation increasingly resembles a game. Hyuk agrees, noting that the condition for forming a group seemed to require 5 awakened members. Shin reflects on the earlier message, reasoning that if its claims are accurate, using the elixirs could expedite their progress significantly. However, Kwang expresses concern that their faction ranked 3rd instead of 2nd or 1st. This realization raises the likelihood of other monsters existing outside their region, reigniting discussions about the safety of their families. Given the dire condition of the soldiers, it is difficult to imagine the state of affairs elsewhere. At this point, most of their families have likely been decimated by the monsters. Shin advises against dwelling on such pessimistic thoughts. While he shares their concerns about the outside world, the group's immediate safety must remain the priority. Hyuk attempts to argue, but Shin interrupts, reminding everyone that they are ahead in this game and must focus on maintaining their lead. Reluctantly, Hyung agrees with the hero, acknowledging that survival is paramount if they hope to eventually locate and rescue their families. Nevertheless, Kwang points out that although 100 soldiers have survived, the faction itself comprises only 5 members. This makes the soldiers think that only the awakened matter, and Shin reflects that the boy isn't wrong. Now that the world has changed so suddenly, if someone isn't awakened, they barely count as a human being. By the way, Hyung recalls that Hyuk gained the sharpshooter class and comments that it must have been granted due to the boy's innate skills. Regarding the class trait, he explains that both accuracy and firing power are enhanced during the shot. Hyung is impressed but also concerned about what will happen when they run out of ammunition. However, Hyuk smiles, telling the officer not to worry about that. After all, if a regular soldier needs 10 shots to kill a beast, he only needs 2. Hearing this, Shin feels quite happy because with this skill, they'll be able to defeat monsters much more efficiently. Now Hyuk is tasked with mastering monster control, and unfortunately, this is the only piece of good news. Shin feels relieved that the unit can relax a little more than usual. But there's still no time to sit back and despair because survival requires progress. Naturally, the soldiers need to continue awakening others, and fortunately, most of them are willing to try. However, some still refuse and tremble with fear. When that happens, the hero intervenes, and within a few minutes, the soldiers' personalities change completely. Each time this happens, Hyung grows more suspicious because all the soldiers exhibit the same impulsive behavior. Eventually, Hyung reaches his breaking point and decides to confront Shin. Frustrated, Hyung yells, accusing the hero of hiding something, as every soldier who speaks with him comes back different. Hyung isn't wrong, and realizing he's been found out, Shin admits everything, explaining it's for the good of the battalion. Thankfully, Hyung understands and focuses on awakening the troops, while the hero continues cooking. While cooking, the system suddenly appears, showing Shin a total of 82 accumulated points. Shin speculates that points are earned either by hunting monsters or cooking well. Typically, in games, points are used to purchase items in a shop, so the boy assumes there must be a similar feature here. After exploring for a while, the hero indeed finds and opens the system's point shop. This confirms his theory, and he eagerly takes a look. Among the available items are a combat axe, a knife, and rye bread. Most of the items are combat-related, and the only thing Shin can use at the moment is the rye bread. Additionally, there are potions that increase specific stats, but they are very expensive. Thus, the protagonist decides to revisit the shop later, as these potions seem important. At this moment, the hero is using the chef's special sauce, boss's eye, and novice dagger proficiency. The last skill allows him to naturally master combat stances using a dagger, and training with Kwang has left him quite satisfied. So far, Shin hasn't tried fighting with fists or swords, but at least he's skilled with a kitchen knife. Still, he wonders how powerful a master-level skill would be if his is only at the novice level. Additionally, the hero accidentally acquired beginner flame affinity after touching a hot pan. Now he can hold flames in his hand for 3 or 4 seconds, with potential for improvement through practice. Last but not least, there's his beginner culinary proficiency. In a conversation with Hyung, Shin explained that the meals had an energizing taste and that his stats had increased. Although no one else seemed to notice, this likely happened because regular soldiers don't yet have a status window. Moreover, the effects of the meals don't appear as system messages. If the system commented on the meal's effects, it would immediately expose the one responsible. In any case, the hero asks Hyung how he feels, and Hyung explains that he feels much stronger, with his strength having increased by 30%. This confirms to the protagonist that the buffs are working. If Hyung is telling the truth, Shin's abilities are definitely above average. Still, he is pondering how to provide the same boost to the entire battalion. At that moment, a desperate soldier bursts in, demanding the surgeon's presence. The soldier, panting heavily, explains that a new type of monster has appeared above the armament depot. However, this monster is entirely different from the armored lizards they've seen before. When they reach the top of the barracks, the soldier introduces himself, and Hyun immediately asks where the monster is. The soldier explains that he was monitoring the area when something he had never seen before caught his attention. Its appearance is completely unlike anything they've encountered so far, so the boy hands binoculars to the officer. From Shin's perspective, the soldier looks visibly shaken, and when the location's indicated, both officers start searching for the monster. Kim asks the hero if he sees anything, but Shin replies that he doesn't, until he spots something very unusual. After searching for a while, Shin finally sees the different monster among the usual ones. As soon as their eyes meet, Shin becomes worried because the beast is heading straight for the barracks. This beast is said to be as tall as 3 meters and is accompanied by others, potentially serving as their leader. The hero agrees that the situation is odd because lizards typically attack in groups of no more than 2. It's clear this larger one came from elsewhere, and with 20 smaller ones alongside it, the danger is immense. Kung states that they'll need a lot of bullets, but that's definitely not the biggest concern. The battalion is outnumbered, but they know the monster's weaknesses. Still, something feels very wrong about this situation. Getting to the point, the hero asks when the beast appeared, and the soldier explains it was earlier that morning. So far, the beast's behavior hasn't been abnormal. It has remained near the perimeter. Hyung suggests that the monsters might be scared, and Shin struggles to understand why they haven't attacked despite their large numbers. After some thought, the hero concludes that the monsters must be waiting for an opening. Shin explains that the monsters know a regular net won't work, which is why they're stationed around the base. This revelation leaves the 2 awakened soldiers quite alarmed, and Huck asks if these beasts are truly intelligent. The hero recalls that wolves are already very intelligent, and these bipedal beasts are likely even smarter. Kwang agrees with Shin and suggests attacking first, which obviously shocks everyone. But Shin quickly dismisses the idea, pointing out that their advantage lies in staying inside the base. In fact, they can't afford to leave. The priority is to monitor the monster's movements and formulate a strategy. With this, Kyung says he'll inform the company commander, and Shin asks him to tell the men to stay vigilant. Once the news spreads, the troops will be fearful, and that fear of an unknown enemy needs to be calmed. Shin returns to the kitchen to add his chef's special sauce to the meals. While eating, 2 soldiers express relief, noting that at least their unit is in a safer location with better chances of survival. The hero finishes preparing a few special dishes, including kimchi octopus. One soldier comments that the situation was scary at first, but now that he's accustomed to it, he feels more relaxed. In addition to the octopus dish, Shin also prepares pork with vegetables. Returning to the earlier soldier, he mentions his worry about his family, but believes that since he survived, they might have too. Somehow, the soldier's morale remains high, ensuring the defense doesn't falter. The total number of awakened individuals is now about 20, nearly half the entire battalion. Later, the hero remarks that nothing has changed yet, and the earlier soldier confirms that the beast hasn't left the perimeter. However, the number of monsters has now doubled compared to when they were first spotted. The soldier expresses concern that the numbers might keep increasing, but Shin reminds him that the number of awakened soldiers has also grown. Among the 23 are elite sharpshooters capable of hitting precise targets even from afar despite their subpar rifles. Shin believes that if they counterattack, they won't lose, and as they continue creating awakened individuals, things will only get easier. At the depot, the hero realizes they'll have to start using the emergency rations next week, and that at least half the people will be awakened by then. At this moment, the troops would be running in panic if not for the buffs from the meals. Shin begins jotting down some items he needs for the depot. Suddenly, he hears a noise and the lights in the hall go out due to a power failure. Naturally, the hero is alarmed because the maintenance team assured him the generators were functioning properly. He immediately wonders if this outage has affected the entire base. Quickly, Shin suspects that this might be a planned move by the monsters. If that's the case, they're in serious trouble. Wasting no time, the protagonist rushes out, knowing the base is now in grave danger. Initially, Shin thought a sharpshooter could handle the situation, but everything changes when there's no line of sight. Without the power generator, the sharpshooters become completely ineffective. In another area of the base, the lieutenant orders everyone to their positions and the sharpshooters to the roof. The rest of the awakened are instructed to focus on their designated tasks. A soldier reports that all troops are gathered at the ammunition depot, so the lieutenant orders the entrance sealed. The gates are quickly closed and locked. At this moment, they're nearly finished positioning the soldiers, and thankfully, they still have some flares. Shin emphasizes that the monsters aren't infinite, but they need to end the battle quickly. Shifting focus, Shin asks about the awakened individuals, and Hyun explains that he has positioned them around the sharpshooters. The mages are divided into offensive and defensive roles, while the warriors take protective positions. Additionally, everyone's morale is strong, thanks to the buffs from Shin's meals. Hyun asks where the protagonist plans to stay, and Shin brandishes his knife. Naturally, Hyun questions this decision to go to the front lines, but Shin reminds him that he was the first awakened. Besides, the officer can't stop the protagonist from doing what he feels is necessary. At that moment, a strong gust of wind starts, accompanied by trembling ground. Looking closely, everyone notices the monsters approaching the base. As the flares illuminate the area, all the soldiers prepare for battle, and the lieutenant grows terrified as he looks through his binoculars. The horde of monsters is drawing dangerously close to the base. Huck urges the captain to give the order, and the lieutenant commands all troops to open fire on the beasts. Dozens, if not hundreds, of shots are fired. While some monsters are taken down, others continue advancing. The meals prepared by the hero are working as intended, but when the flares stop working, they'll be in serious trouble. Amid the chaos, the chief monster appears. Being the most dangerous of them all, the sharpshooters shift their focus to it. Assistants quickly deliver more ammunition to the awakened soldiers, and Huck declares he'll take it down. At that moment, the protagonist accidentally activates his boss's eye ability. The system informs him that the lizard chief is the rarest and strongest of the pack, with no other monster daring to challenge its decisions. The chief is also incredibly fast, dodging every bullet fired at it. Shin realizes they aren't the same species after all. However, to Shin, it doesn't matter how strong the chief is, it's foolish for it to be on the front lines as a commander. This behavior only makes it a giant target for the awakened soldiers. But with an ear-splitting roar, the beast begins influencing the other monsters. The roar reaches the base, causing severe discomfort to the troops. The system informs them that the soldiers have been exposed to a powerful war cry. As a result, the strength, speed, and health of all the lizards temporarily increase. Additionally, all lizards gain bullet resistance. In contrast, all nearby non-lizard creatures are afflicted with confusion and disorientation. Hyun, terrified, asks Shin what's happening. Realizing the state of the troops, Shin understands they are in serious danger. Soldiers quickly report to the lieutenant, who is stunned by the existence of such a devastating ability. Without time to think, some of the normal monsters start advancing much more aggressively. Kek remains on the roof, clutching his head in pain, confirming that the effects are exactly as described by the system. At this point, the defenses are collapsing, prompting Kek to yell at his comrades, demanding to know what they're doing. With a desperate shout, Kek orders everyone to regroup and keep shooting. Amid all the chaos, the hero is at the front lines helping to subdue the monsters. In his mind, Shin realizes the rate of fire has dropped significantly, likely due to the debuff from the chief monster. Bullets are no longer effective, so all remaining ammunition is distributed to the awakened soldiers. Kam questions why the monster didn't use this ability earlier. Shin recalls that the system message mentioned the effect was temporary, meaning the chief waited for the right moment. In the end, this beast was capable not only of intelligent thought, but also of devising a plan. Regardless, Shin tells Hyun to gather all the awakened soldiers. For Shin, attacking from a distance no longer makes sense. everyone needs to prepare for close combat. After explaining his plan, each awakened soldier is handed a special treat. Since no one understands yet, the hero decides to reveal the full truth. It's likely some of them have already guessed, but Shin's abilities can enhance those of others. He reminds them that everyone has experienced eating something he prepared before their awakening. That's why the food now not only tastes better, but also provides special effects to those who consume it. Shin explains he didn't know what the monsters would do, so he prepared treats with specific buffs for each individual. Hyung reassures everyone that if they follow their training, the unit has a chance to succeed. This way, the soldiers can secure the base and ensure the group's survival. At this point, the entire battalion has been reinforced and Kwang is tasked with handling the chief monster. After eating his high-quality treat, Kwang doesn't hesitate for a moment to accept the responsibility. Back on the rooftop, Kuk again questions what everyone is doing, stating he can no longer hold off the advancing monsters. Meanwhile, on the ground level of the barracks, the awakened soldiers are gearing up for the beast's charge. The increased attack effect takes hold as all the monsters leap over the unit's barricades. The lieutenant panics, but the awakened soldiers are ready for combat. With a single punch, Kwang sends one of the monsters flying. Even when attacked by another, he doesn't get cornered, and as everyone fights simultaneously, a massive clash erupts. During the battle, Hyung issues commands instructing the soldiers not to scatter. However, one of the awakened is pushed into a corner. Just as the monster is about to finish him off, Shin appears with his kitchen knife. With a single slash, he takes down the monster, causing trouble. Naturally, Shin must deal with the beasts as well, but the chief's buff has made the lizards incredibly strong. Shin knows he can't face them alone, not even if he were a high-level chef. However, after consuming a chocolate cookie of courage he made himself, Shin's stats skyrocket. All his attributes without exception are boosted for an entire day, and the chef's special sauce adds a courage effect. Now, the normal lizards are no longer a threat, and the soldiers under the courage buff dominate the battlefield. Additionally, enemy stats and morale are reduced. As the chief charges forward, the system notifies that this will unlock new traits for the allies. The first to feel these effects is Kwang, whose confusion debuffs are neutralized by the courage buff. Feeling reinvigorated, Kwang shouts for his comrades to follow him into an honorable battle. The monsters swarm toward the entrance, and all troops converge on the gate. Kwang leads the charge, fearlessly rushing toward the chief monster. When they meet, their powerful punches collide. From afar, Hyung laughs, exclaiming how incredible this feels. He asks Shin what he did to boost their stats so significantly. But Shin has no time to talk as he's busy taking down monsters. Nevertheless, Hyung declares that with these buffs, they've already surpassed the enemy and victory is only a matter of time. Shin, however, warns everyone not to let their guard down just yet. They need to hold off the lizards while Kwang takes down the leader. With this, the hero orders Hyung to provide long-range support. The two charge into battle. Another awakened soldier uses a shield ability for defense, while the sharpshooters continue firing. Hyung unleashes a thunder spear ability to attack, and the hero wields his kitchen cleaver. However, Shin quickly remembers Kwang, who is still alone in a direct confrontation with the chief. Although his strikes are effective, the monster's resilience far exceeds that of the others. Because of this, the beast wraps its tail around the officer's neck and throws him far away. As it moves to finish him off, an awakened soldier appears to help. Soon after, another awakened joins in, and together they manage to bring the beast down with a daring maneuver. At that moment, it's Kwang's time to shine. Without hesitation, he charges forward, leaps toward the chief, and delivers a powerful punch that makes the monster roar in pain. He continues attacking relentlessly, even biting the beast and tearing off a chunk. With sheer brutality, Kwang finally defeats the monster chief, while most of the remaining monsters have already been subdued. Shin orders everyone to stay on guard and instructs senior officers to confirm the unit's status. With great relief, the soldiers begin celebrating and smiling, though Shin still seems somewhat incredulous. Even in a situation where their firearms were rendered ineffective, they managed to prevail. Suddenly, the system appears, congratulating Shin for securing control of Region Rock 27. It informs him that the group has been provisionally designated as Battalion 423. The system also displays the occupation battle status for the global event, though the specific values remain hidden. Naturally, no one fully understands what this means until the system clarifies that this group was the first to occupy a major area. With all this information, the hero can't help but laugh and celebrate their first-place achievement. With the conclusion of that great conflict between humans and monsters, a wave of despair set in. This was because there were many injured and a long line had formed at the infirmary. Amidst the commotion, the most severely wounded were placed on stretchers, and Mr. Park was tasked with bringing in patients. After the battle, the busiest individuals were the awakened soldiers with healing powers. Fortunately, the healers and regular medics managed to handle the situation. After an awakened soldier used their healing abilities, the soldier's pain disappeared. Hyung, feeling relieved, commented that the situation was stabilizing and that things were finally calming down. The hero thanked Hyung for his hard work, but the officer emphasized that the credit belonged to Kwang and Soo-hyuk. At this moment, both of them were completely exhausted and unconscious on stretchers. The protagonist then inquired about the battalion commander, but Hyung admitted he didn't know where he was either. This was expected by Shin, though he still found it disappointing. Later, Shin asked how far they could protect the area, and Hyung responded that it extended to the mountain range. Hyung explained this because the system indicated they had taken control of the ridge. Currently, the soldiers were stationed at the highest peak of the range with only the lizards as opposing forces. However, the officer wondered if this was related to occupying the most iconic location. If Hyung's assumption was correct, the soldiers had defended the mountains against the lizards and were recognized as occupants. To Shin, this sounded like good news for the group. Hyung continued, noting that the previous day's losses had dealt a significant blow to the lizard group. For this reason, the officer suggested that launching a counterattack now to eliminate them quickly would be the best move. However, Shin made it clear that this would be very difficult. Hyung questioned why, but Shin reminded him that the previous day's battle had been extremely challenging, even with the advantage of the terrain. To Shin, there's a vast difference between defending a position and breaking through one. But the officer pressed further, pointing out that they now had incredible powers and even more awakened soldiers. Shin warned Hyung not to rely too much on the buffs from the meals. Those meals required high-quality ingredients, customized flavors, and 4 to 7 hours of preparation. Hearing this, the officer was surprised to learn they weren't just ordinary dishes. Shin explained that he had been preparing for the invasion for a long time, but replicating such efforts now would be impossible. Hyun thought for a moment and agreed they would have to address these issues later. Changing the subject, the officer shouted for the soldiers to unload the next truck once their current tasks were complete. After the battle, many monster corpses remained, and it wasn't feasible to burn or bury them all. Shin asked Hyung if he had reviewed the system's benefits. Shin had analyzed all the options but still didn't know which one to choose. Hyung smiled and told Shin to pick any option. Though seemingly important, no one had any information about the benefits yet. Hyung added that both he and the others would feel more confident if the hero made the first choice. With the commander absent, Shin realized they couldn't rely on him for guidance. The hero decided to select the Bamana Mobile Fortress. Hyun questioned the choice and Shin explained that the name suggested its purpose. Shin believed the benefit might provide something like a war tank. Even though they didn't need it now, it would be essential later when the group inevitably ran out of food. Though unsure of its exact nature, Shin was confident it would help. Convinced by this explanation, Hyung decided to make the same choice. Shin selected the Bamana Mobile Fortress benefit and activated the power of summoning. Surrounded by a golden aura, Shin attempted to summon the mobile fortress. However, after waiting a moment, the system informed them there wasn't enough space at the current location for the summoning. Hyun was shocked, and Shin suggested it was likely due to the number of bodies on the ground. The two decided to move to a more open area to test the new power. Before leaving, Hyun ordered the soldiers to finish the remaining tasks. As they walked to the location, all Shin could think about was how large the fortress might be. By evening, they still hadn't found a place with enough space to summon the fortress. Naturally, Shin felt frustrated at not being able to test his power, but at least he gained some experience. The system mentioned that the hero earns 1 experience point every time someone eats an enhanced dish. Given this, Shin thought things seemed to be going very well. He was getting stronger and the troops' awakening process was progressing steadily. At that moment, someone knocked on his door, and upon opening it, Shin saw that it was Lieutenant Kim. Shin quickly stood up to greet the lieutenant, showing the proper respect for the chain of command. After acknowledging that he was resting, Kim smiled warmly at the hero. Without wasting time, the lieutenant approached and praised Shin for his excellent work. Kim continued showering the hero with compliments, but Shin felt it was unnecessary, especially coming from someone who avoided critical moments but always spoke well when it suited him. Returning to his flattery, Kim thanked God that everyone was safe but admitted there was no good news yet. Shin asked what happened to the 2 soldiers sent to the higher command units. Casually, Kim sat down and remarked that they likely wouldn't return. Grinding his teeth in anger, Shin thought about how he could have been chosen for that mission instead. Kim then mentioned hearing rumors about the cafeteria being closed and the troops switching to combat rations. Shin confirmed the news. The lieutenant asked why they couldn't simply eat proper meals. Apologetically, Shin explained that they were experiencing shortages and needed to conserve resources. Still, Kim reminded Shin that during the awakening process, he hadn't spared any food. Shin clarified that it wasn't by choice. It had been a special treatment to help the soldiers endure the dangers of awakening. Kim asked what the awakened soldiers ate the last time, and Shin tried explaining the effects of his food. Naturally, Kim didn't believe him, and there wasn't much Shin could do about it. After all, Kim was the only high-ranking officer left in the battalion. Moreover, if there were any surviving military forces in the outside world, Kim would, unfortunately, become a significant figure in the future. Shin had no choice but to endure and comply with Kim's demands. However, sensing Shin's reluctance, the lieutenant became irritated and shouted that he would eat the damned rations. Despite his frustration, Kim begrudgingly let the matter drop, acknowledging the battalion's dire situation. He left the room, slamming the door loudly on his way out. Even though Shin had never smoked before, the stress of the situation made him consider lighting a cigarette. Since the soldiers had secured the mountain territory, monster attacks had been reduced by more than half. In the hospital, Shin recounted everything that had happened to Hyuk, who had been injured during his awakening. Though Hyuk had heard the story before, he thanked Shin for doing the hard work, but Shin reminded him that everyone had contributed. Changing the subject, Shin asked if there was any treatment for Hyuk's injured leg, but Hyuk said it was too late. Despite his injury, Hyuk was in good health, though walking remained a challenge. This didn't stop Shin from feeling guilty about what happened. He thought that if he hadn't pushed Hyuk to awaken, things might have turned out differently. Noticing Shin's guilt, Hyuk reassured him that he held no resentment. If they hadn't pursued awakening so relentlessly, they would have been devoured by the monsters, and his injury was just part of the process. To the soldiers, Shin was the reason they were still standing, and Hyuk urged him not to shoulder all the guilt alone. The heartfelt speech moved Shin, and Hyuk invited him to step outside for some fresh air. Outside, Hyuk explained that his job was as an astronomer, which, naturally, Shin didn't understand. Hyuk clarified that it involved reading constellations to predict certain events. Sometimes it even allowed him to foresee the future through horoscopes or similar methods. In the end, the hero feels excited, understanding Hyuk's ability as a kind of human radar. Apparently, the skill has nothing to do with real combat, but it can detect danger before a confrontation. Because it's so useful for planning strategies, Hyuk decided to see the hero. Hyuk reveals that he's discovered two things, one of which is that the battalion will receive some visitors tomorrow. Shin immediately understands what this means, and Hyuk advises the cook to keep his claws hidden. The next morning, a group of people approaches, surprised to find a military base in the area. They shout, hoping there are soldiers present, and a mother expresses relief, believing they can now survive. Without hesitation, the group runs toward the military base, which for some unknown reason has its gates open. Earlier that day, soldiers on the building's roof remarked that the visitors were about an hour away. On the morning of the 11th day since the attack, the hero and an officer spot a human climbing the mountain. Hyun points out that the civilians are ignoring signs prohibiting entry into military zones. He asks what should be done, as they likely have nowhere else to go. Shin responds that the battalion will shelter them. Though Hyun doesn't think it's the best decision, he doesn't argue. Before the visitors arrive, Shin wonders if these are the people Tae-jun mentioned. An hour later, in the military base's courtyard, a soldier organizes the civilians, instructing them to calm down and form a single line. Another soldier walks around with a clipboard to register the civilians, and water is distributed among the refugees. After counting, Hyun reports there are 25 civilians of various ages and genders. For now, Hyun suggests moving the soldiers to the second floor to leave the third floor for the visitors. He also recommends increasing night patrols, to which Shin smiles, saying they'll start by cleaning the second floor. In the background, the lieutenant greets the soldier who handled the initial reception of the refugees. Shin asks if it's the commander, and Hyun confirms, noting that Kim is here to play the executive role. Kim introduces himself as the unit commander and tries to reassure the civilians with comforting words. The civilians become slightly excited, having assumed the base only had ordinary soldiers. Changing the subject, the civilians ask about the troops' situation and whether there's any food available. Kim shouts back that everything will be arranged as soon as the paperwork is completed. He orders the nearest soldier to handle it quickly. Hyun pulls Shin aside for a conversation. During introductions, Kim explains that the two are the highest-ranking officers after him and second in command. Without delay, Kim asks if there's enough room in the quarters for everyone. Hyun confirms there is. Kim then assigns Hyun to guide the civilians and oversee arrangements. He also mentions speaking with Hyun later and requests that any problems be reported immediately. For the hero, with everyone starving, he's asked to add 25 extra portions to the meals. Though it's a stretch, neither of them can refuse. Increasing the meal count by a quarter is bound to strain resources. For the civilians, however, they now feel safe, crediting the lieutenant's management. Hyun grows irritated by Kim's smug smile, but Shin calms him, reminding him that they have no choice but to comply. When the soldiers tried to lead, no one listened. Now that Kim is in the base, everyone follows him, showing how much the refugees respect ranks. With sweet words and fake smiles, the civilians fall further under the charlatan's spell. Despite Kim being a poor officer, Hyun admits he's skilled with words. Getting straight to the point, Shin heads to the cafeteria immediately, and Hyun releases some soldiers to accompany him. Later, the refugees climb the building stairs to their new resting place. An elderly man complains about being on the third floor and having to climb so many steps. Kwon quickly explains that in an invasion, the first floor is the most dangerous, which is why civilians are housed higher up. Anyway, the elderly man continues complaining, saying he's uncomfortable there. But others are just happy to be able to take a bath. They are informed there is no hot water, and though a girl complains, the civilians understand they're not in a hotel. Later, it's time to eat. After sitting in the cafeteria and tasting Shin's food, many compliments are heard. One even remarks they never thought steamed rice could taste so good. Shin is still a bit surprised at how suddenly everything happened, but he's glad they're enjoying it. However, he remains worried about ingredients, since soon they'll have to rely on emergency rations. At this rate, everyone will run out of supplies in just over a month. Breaking his heavy thoughts, someone approaches to compliment the meal. Shin thanks them, but the blonde doesn't miss the opportunity to comment on the hero's talent and ask what he does for a living. The question feels odd to ask a soldier. Shin is about to say chef, but he holds back and claims to be a university student. The three thank him and leave, leaving Shin reflecting on the unexpected question about his occupation. Currently, jobs aren't what they used to be. They become much more exclusive. These professions appear in the status window, visible only to the awakened. If others had been asked, they would have likely responded with warrior or healer. Shin wonders if this is what Tae-jun was referring to earlier. While walking through the building, Young seems displeased, now burdened with not only dealing with monsters, but also caring for survivors. Outside the building, the soldier asks how things ended up in such chaos, while another laments not even being able to rest. The first soldier declares he can't take it anymore, and one mentions that the lieutenant has only made things worse. One soldier says he prefers the surgeons in charge as they've proven far more competent than Kim. The others agree as a sense of camaraderie has already formed among them. Hyum overhears this conversation in the background. Later, soldiers personally voice their opinions about the lieutenant to the sergeant, recalling Kim's cowardice. One mentions that Kim's high rank provides him with significant security and there's nothing they can do about it. Still, another soldier insists they're fighting a war against monsters, and a commander like Kim will only hinder their efforts. The soldier then asks the surgeon's opinion. Though he doesn't respond, Hyung silently agrees with everything. Hyun has always felt uneasy around Kim, knowing the lieutenant wouldn't fight alongside the battalion. No one respects a commander who disappears on the battlefield. If this continues, troop morale and unity will crumble. Hyun resolves that something must be done about this situation as soon as possible. Later, everyone gathers on the roof of the military building, many confused about the secret meeting. Without delay, Hyun apologizes for calling everyone so late. But he explains he can't wait any longer, seeing the discomfort on everyone's faces in the unit. Getting straight to the point, Hyun announces he met with Lieutenant Kim, a statement that immediately captures everyone's attention. In the end, it was nothing significant. Hyun had expressed their concerns and asked Kim to join the fight, but as expected, nothing changed. Kim's response to a polite request was that he wouldn't be forced into anything by a mere soldier. A heavy silence falls over the group. After a moment of reflection, everyone becomes outraged, concluding that Kim doesn't care about them. Even Shivan hadn't anticipated such behavior from the tyrant that Kim has become. Returning to the matter at hand, Hyun warns that this is no trivial issue. It's about everyone's survival. For this reason, Hyun organized the meeting, stating that their goal now is to get rid of Kim. Naturally, everyone initially thinks it's madness to resort to such extremism. Even the hero questions his colleague, pointing out they can't simply remove a lieutenant. Hyun then asks if Shin isn't on his side and for how long he plans to continue being carried by him. Anyway, Shin feels a bit uneasy, as despite everything, Kim is still a high-ranking officer. However, Hyun points out that as more survivors join the unit, the group will grow larger. He then questions what will happen if Kim remains the representative in these meetings. To him, there will come a point where many people will believe the lieutenant is the true leader of the unit. At that moment, the lower-ranked leaders will lose all autonomy in the battalion. Hyun shouts, asking if he's wrong, emphasizing that since Kim has no strength, there's no reason to continue following him obediently. After thinking it over, everyone begins to find it unbelievable they've followed such an incompetent lieutenant for so long. However, they acknowledge that they're still soldiers and cannot simply ignore him, as Kim once fulfilled his role before the crisis. Kwang, on the other hand, finds the idea too dangerous, stating that internal betrayal is a form of modern warfare. Hyun agrees and warns that this is precisely why they need to execute the plan quickly. Excluding Kim, the highest ranks in the battalion, aside from the surgeons, will go to Park Tae-jun and Shin Young-jun. Even regular soldiers will be allowed to act on commands in the absence of officers. To Hyun, this won't be a problem as Shin will leave battalion. In reality, the reason Hyun called this meeting was to address Kim's detrimental influence on the unit. However, many soldiers are reluctant to accept a cook as their commander, prompting Shin to remind them he's the one feeding them and providing the buffs. Regardless, Hyun's second suggestion takes precedence because Shin's leadership is already a fact. For anyone with objections, Hyun yells for them to speak up, but Shin can sense the soldiers' skepticism. In that moment, the troops begin to recall how the hero has always looked out for them, comforting them with good food. After reflecting, the soldiers realize they can rely on him, knowing Shin's buffs helped them win the recent invasion. With that, Hyun asks if there are any further objections, though Shin remains worried. When no one speaks up, Hyun officially appoints Shin as the new commander. Although Shin disagrees with this, Hyun insists he accept the role. Upon the appointment, the system appears, stating that all conditions have been met. With over 30 players and a recognized leader, a clan has been formed. As the first in the small region and the second in the larger region, the group is awarded a token as a reward. Shin is named the leader of Clan 423, and a new title of Novice Chef Leader appears in his status. This marks a new chapter. Sergeant Shin must now lead the entire unit. Realizing this, Shin resolves to do the job right. His first proposal as commander is to keep Lieutenant Kim alive. Naturally, this decision confuses both Hyun and Kwang. Everyone urges Shin to reconsider, but he asks the soldiers to hear him out. Shin explains that if they start discarding people for convenience, they'll be alive in body but dead in spirit. To preserve their humanity, they should only kill people if attacked first. He asks everyone to promise to uphold this principle. Kim feels a surge of pride for the new leadership the battalion now has. Still, the soldiers question why they should keep Kim alive when he's no longer of any use. In response, Shin clarifies that Kim is just a problematic human being. At the moment, discarding him would be wasteful because he will undoubtedly be useful in the future. This leaves everyone even more puzzled about what their new commander is thinking. Later, from the third floor of the base, a civilian informs them that the soldiers have returned. The blonde civilian remarks on how the troops left in the middle of the night as a group, prompting another to ask if there's an issue. The blonde assures there's nothing alarming yet, noting they're just a bunch of 20-somethings. However, he comments that the captain seems strong even if he wasn't among the troops leading them. Changing the subject, the blonde asks if his companion checked what he had requested. The response is affirmative. No awakened individuals were found. Another member of the group also took a closer look and noted that the soldiers appeared to be using weapons to kill the monsters. The blonde leader concludes that there's a good chance there are no awakened individuals among them, and now might be the time to act. However, just to be cautious, he decides to wait a few more days. The next day, many people gather excitedly in the cafeteria for a proper meal. Meanwhile, Shin examines his clan leader token, which can offer a stat bonus depending on the group's size. The system informs him that he can choose an object to symbolize the group and transform it into the token. Providing stat bonuses to all group members is a powerful effect. However, Shin laments that he doesn't have any suitable object to represent the group. The day before, Shin had expressed doubts about his position, but Hyung reassured him by recalling the soldiers' reactions. By then, the story of Shin killing a monster with just a knife had spread. The soldiers didn't oppose Shin's leadership because they trusted him, knowing they needed a reliable leader. While Kwon was an option, his personality fluctuated too much between being overly aggressive and overly gentle. In the end, Shin was the only trustworthy and capable person left to lead. In the kitchen, a soldier salutes Shin, who asks if he relayed his instructions to everyone. The soldier confirms and adds that whenever someone asks about their occupation, they try not to act suspiciously or mention statuses. Shin also instructed them to avoid discussing awakening as much as possible. This is because it's best to keep their advantages hidden and use Taejun's advice strategically. Still, Shin believes this won't hinder their ability to increase the number of awakened soldiers. After all, they have the elite snipers. However, the soldier warns there's another issue. The survivors are continually requesting to speak with them, and one woman in particular keeps asking for a favor. Shin asks if it's important, but the soldier only knows she appears to be the leader of the survivor group. Interrupting his thoughts, Shin decides he should be the one to have this conversation with her. This is partly because he's wary of how Kim might react, but Shin assures the soldier he will handle the lieutenant. Thus, Shin tells the soldier not to worry because he already has a plan. First, he decides to address the favor and requests 3 representatives from the survivor group. He specifies that the meeting will take place after dinner and that no information should be leaked. Later, Shin prepares a delicious pasta dish and begins organizing the area. Outside, some soldiers notice the commander entering the basement. Confused, one soldier asks why, and another explains there's a room beneath the dining hall. The space was originally built to supply hot water and electricity to the dining hall, housing a boiler and a generator. The soldier speculates that the room is being used for something else now, certainly not as storage. In the basement, Shin reflects on Min-jae's idea to use the space as a prison, noting how perfect it is for a cell. Without delay, he delivers the meal to the room's sole prisoner. The prisoner, upon noticing Shin, looks confused and surprised. This is because the man locked up is none other than Lieutenant Kim, and his cell warden is his former cook. The day before, the soldiers had set their plan into motion. With a sudden entrance into the commander's room, Hyun activated his electricity-based powers. This left the lieutenant unconscious, with no chance to defend himself. Back in the present, Kim appears remorseful and says he'll apologize to all the soldiers he offended. Shin, puzzled, asks what he means, and Kim explains that he recently spilled coffee on a radar and blamed the guard. Kim admits he made a mistake during the inspection, but knows that's not the reason for his imprisonment. Shin understands how frustrating it must be for Kim to be locked in a cell with nothing to do and no clear explanation for his confinement. At that moment, Kim begins to vent about other mistakes he remembers making. Now aware of his mistakes, Kim asks Shin for help, but the hero explained that he had tried convincing the soldiers, but they were all still too resentful. Understanding his situation, Kim began to accept his fate. At the moment, the lieutenant found himself in a hopeless situation, recalling more and more instances of officers who had died under his command. However, Shin reassured him, promising to continue trying to convince the others while also bringing him good meals. Moved by such kindness, Kim felt a twinge of guilt for accepting so much. Yet, as the hero had gone out of his way to bring him his favorite dish, Kim simply expressed his gratitude. Upon taking his first bite, he entered a state of uncontrollable delight due to the incredible flavor. Tears streaming, Kim regained a small sense of happiness, feeling alive again. Shin thought it wasn't a bad idea to bring him the meal. He hoped the lieutenant could savor that moment of happiness. Days earlier, Hyung had questioned Shin's decision to cook lizard meat, and the hero explained it was due to the food shortage. Regardless, the surgeon asked if the meat was even edible, and Shin admitted he wasn't sure. However, with no better alternative as a food source, Shin began experimenting with new ingredients. He discovered that the taste and performance of his dishes improved when magic was incorporated. After completing a dish, Shin earned the title of Pioneer, awarded to those who pave new paths in their field. Since this title granted a 100% increase in skill effectiveness, Shin thought it was interesting to use it on a monster-based dish for the lieutenant. Later in the kitchen, Shin finished preparing roasted lizard pasta infused with happiness. As it was the first time such a dish was made, Shin's experience increased. Back in the present, Kim remarked how it had been a long time since his last proper meal and that he felt amazing now. He reflected on this immense pleasure as he finished his meal. Meanwhile, Shin repeated the process multiple times, happy to feed the lieutenant every day. Even more so, he was pleased to make Kim's palate and brain addicted to his cooking. After a few days of repeating the routine, Shin stopped serving happy meals and switched to combat rations. This threw Kim into a near-mad state, as he had developed a deep dependency. As expected, the plan worked, and Shin declared it was time to get to work. From the sidelines, Kyung couldn't comprehend what Shin was planning as the hero was feeding Kim 3 meals a day. The surgeon began to suspect that Kim was a huge fan of lizard meat. Meanwhile, Kwon mentioned that Shin had requested another awakened lizard, and slowly, the two began to understand the plan. Back in the basement, Kim aggressively insisted that Shin bring him a proper meal. However, Shin remarked that such behavior was unacceptable, and that if Kim wanted a better meal, this wasn't the way to act. Still, everything was calculated. Shin was well aware of the emptiness the lieutenant felt after days of continuous happiness. Once again, Kim attempted to give orders, invoking his authority as an officer to demand a meal. But Shin made it clear that unless Kim's attitude changed, he would simply leave and return the next day. Forced to change tactics, Kim resorted to pleading, promising to do anything Shin asked. Thus, Shin agreed to cook, but only under a special condition. Without delay, they moved to another hall, now designated as the place where new awakenings were performed. For Shin, Kim was a potential lottery ticket, though the lieutenant was visibly terrified. The task required for Kim to earn his meal was simple. He had to kill a monster. Kim did what was necessary to eat again and awaken as a level 1 novice commander. Naturally, Kim was quite shocked, discovering his ability increased all nearby troops' stats by 10%. This was a much better percentage increase than Shin had anticipated. While Kim nervously asked the younger soldiers to explain what was happening, Shin could only think about how lucky he had been. There are 2 main ways to improve stats: fixed number increases and percentage-based ones. Fixed stat boosts are more effective when the target has low base stats. Percentage-based increases have a greater effect as the base stats grow higher. Therefore, the lieutenant's abilities will become more effective as the troops' stats improve, which is excellent. At that moment, the system congratulates Shin with the achievement Irresistible Flavor and rewards him with the Dragon's Heart. Additionally, Shin levels up to 10 and is promoted from Novice Chef to Junior Chef Level 1. This promotion allows Shin to understand that reaching the highest rank is about mastering his craft. Now his stats increase by 2 per level instead of 1. Moreover, all novice talents have been replaced with junior-level talents. Even with novice-level abilities, Shin was already performing at a master's level compared to before. Now Shin wonders how things will progress, especially as the next batch of battle rations is already complete. With all the updates, Shin remarks how much he loves his skill since battle rations can produce preserved food for emergencies. Though less powerful than regular meals, they have a longer shelf life and are rich in calories, making it easier to feed the troops. Reflecting on everything, Shin is once again surprised at how useful the lieutenant has been. However, with that issue resolved, it is now time to focus on the survivors. Later, as everyone gathers, the person in charge decides to start, but one of the soldiers notices the lieutenant's absence. In response, Shin explains that Kim is unwell due to the meals, which leaves everyone confused. Regardless, Shin asks the troops not to worry since Hyung Min-jae, the most educated member of the unit, will represent them. Hyung realizes Shin is simply delegating responsibilities onto him. Shin denies this, reiterating that while he may be the leader, he won't be the one micromanaging everything. With that, Hyung declares it's time to head to the meeting, and Shin wishes him good luck. In the shared dormitory section, Hyung enters with his team and notes how early everyone arrived. As Hyung and Shin take their seats, the soldiers sense a tense atmosphere. Shin is certain there might be someone among them who intends to harm the unit. Following Taejun's instructions, they need to hide their powers. Their strategy for this meeting is to gather as much information as possible without revealing anything. Without delay, the surgeon introduces himself as the meeting's facilitator. The woman who requested the meeting asks where the lieutenant is. Hyun explains that Kim suggested it would be better for the operation leaders to attend instead. Agreeing with an odd reaction, the woman catches Shin's attention with her demeanor. The blonde survivor claims that communicating with regular soldiers is pointless, but Hyun explains that he and Shin are the highest-ranking members of the division. The survivor then questions why it took 3 days to arrange the meeting. Hyun explains that this delay allowed them to rest and identify the ideal representatives. As expected, everyone is busy with military duties. The blonde accuses Hyun of prioritizing work over people, but Hyun assures him this isn't the case. The argument continues, irritating Shin, who recognizes the type of person who believes they can dictate everything. The blonde insists that Hyun, as a soldier, should prioritize people first. Unable to bear it anymore, the woman shouts at Park Kwon-chang to stop, startling everyone. She emphasizes that the military took time from their schedules to speak with them and orders Park to be quiet. This outburst reveals the leader of the group to Shin. Returning to the discussion, the woman apologizes for Park's behavior, and Hyun admits they took too long to schedule the meeting. Introducing herself, the woman reveals her name is Lee Sang-ah, formerly a clothing store owner before the incident. Hyun expresses relief that she made it safely to the unit. Getting to the point, Hyun asks if she can share how she ended up at the unit. Understanding its importance, Park agrees to let her explain. Shin feels proud of his comrade's composure and effectiveness during the meeting. Without delay, Lee Sang-ah begins recounting how monsters suddenly appeared about 2 weeks ago. At the same time, everyone lost communication, including internet, TV, and phone services. At that moment, the survivors were attacked by all kinds of monsters, and those who were injured but survived turned into zombies. This revelation left the two soldiers completely shocked. Obviously, the surgeon assumes the survivors are talking about the lizards, as they haven't seen any zombies so far. The hero also finds it unexpected, prompting the girl to ask if there's a problem. The surgeon quickly reassures her, giving the excuse that they simply don't use the term zombie. This confuses the group, as the monsters are clearly human-like. In response, the girl asks what the soldiers call them, and Hyun quickly improvises, saying they call them walkers. Shin doesn't fully understand the reasoning, but the group members recognize the term from dramas and accept the name. They even consider adopting the term, but Hyun backtracks, admitting that zombie is more accurate, which Lee simply accepts. Shin thinks Young is a bit clumsy, but is relieved that the plan worked. Lee's story began with her running desperately to escape the zombies. She joined a group of survivors she encountered by chance. While searching for a safe place, one survivor found and informed them about the military base. This survivor is the older man currently among the group. At this point, Kwang asks how the man knew about the base's location. The man explains that a friend who worked in construction had told him about it. He mentioned working on a military base near the city, saying there was a base deep in the mountains. The group didn't know the exact location, but decided to explore since they needed to descend the mountain anyway. Hyun remarks that their journey must have been long and dangerous. Shin, curious about the group's survival tools, notes they appear to have no weapons besides a metal pipe. He asks how the survivors managed to escape the monsters. The girl openly shares that they awakened powers. This was obvious to Shin, since such feats wouldn't be possible without awakening. Of the 25 survivors, the girl claims to be the only awakened one who led the group to safety. This information intrigues Shin, though he finds it odd there's only one awakened individual. In case they doubt her, the girl stands up to demonstrate her abilities. Smiling, she removes 2 scissors from the back of her jacket. Lee explains these are ordinary sewing scissors she used for fixing curtains. Shin recalls hearing that the girl worked in a repair shop where she likely gained her abilities. Without hesitation, Lee presses the scissors against the table and cuts it in half. This leaves the surgeon amazed and Shin with a familiar feeling. After showcasing her powers, Lee recounts that she was working as usual when the monsters attacked. In that desperate moment, she grabbed her scissors. Just as she was about to be killed, she managed to stab one of the zombies with the scissors tip. A blue window appeared, granting her superpowers. Now Lee claims she can decapitate zombies with a single scissor movement. Shin speculates that the conditions for awakening with zombies might differ. Curious, he asks why only the girl awakened, which is also her question. Shin theorizes that killing a zombie alone might not be enough to trigger awakening. Nevertheless, the situation feels odd to him. A few days earlier, Tae-jun explicitly warned that someone might plan against the unit. Shin finds it hard to believe Lee is truly the group's only awakened individual. Changing the subject, Hyun asks if Lee knows anything specific about awakening. She admits she doesn't know the exact criteria and believes it's random. Hyun thanks her for the information and offers to assist whenever she needs help. Shin interprets this offer differently, but tries not to dwell on it. In the end, Shin believes they don't harbor malicious intentions because doing so would also put them at risk. Kev adds that he'd like to explain the current situation of the unit, and Lee expresses her gratitude. Then he asks Kwang to clean the table and prepare a leftover portion. But the hero uses this time to start devising a trap. Outside, he can't stop thinking about these zombies and the other types of monsters mentioned. This means the unit would never know what to expect if not for the visitors. At that moment, 2 people come running in, announcing that the dishes are all washed. The hero thanks them, and one girl remarks it's no big deal, as it's fair to repay the meals. In response, Shin mentions he has some snacks he just prepared and invites them to try some. Naturally, they're excited, and to avoid causing trouble, he clarifies it's a gift for their service. The black-haired girl is especially thrilled, and Shin explains he made the snacks from leftover ingredients, so they shouldn't be bad. So they see no reason not to try the ice cream. But this was a special ice cream infused with the chef's special sauce of happiness. The hero's plan is to start spreading a rumor that helping with chores around the base earns rewards. When they take their first bite, it's enough to create a buzz. One of them even admits she didn't expect the ice cream to be so good. However, the other girl finds it odd that her friend is smiling. This is because she hasn't smiled once since her parents' death, but she explains she suddenly felt like it. Hearing this, the black-haired girl starts crying, moved by her friend's happiness. Trying to console her, the smiling girl says it's something to enjoy and not cry about. Shin knows that after losing her parents, the girl has many repressed emotions. Right now, she's acting happy, but this emotional change is temporary. Still, the effect on her mentality will linger long after the ability wears off, much like it did with Kwon. Regardless, the ice cream works, and the hero believes it'll be good to try this strategy more often. Later that night, after the meeting, Hyun informs Shin that he has the room number of the guy who kept asking about their activities. Apparently, there are 5 people in the room who've known each other since before the outbreak. While being friends doesn't necessarily make them accomplices, Hyun still suspects they might be working together. The hero asks what they'll do next since they can't simply eliminate the group and carry on as usual. Hyun agrees, knowing they can't risk triggering protests among the survivors. Additionally, they can't just wait, as more awakened individuals would pose a serious threat. Shin suggests getting them to eat his food and eventually confess to whatever they're planning. Changing the topic, the hero recalls that the survivors agreed to clean the rooms and dining hall. In this case, he proposes choosing one of them to stay in the dining hall with him. Hyun asks if Shin plans to do the same thing he did with Kwang and the lieutenant, to which Shin confirms. Seeing his colleague's confidence, the surgeon agrees to proceed. However, he questions if it'll be that easy and asks if the hero has other abilities besides buffs. This obviously makes Shin uncomfortable as he feels caught off guard. Still, Hyun decides not to push, knowing the abilities will come to light sooner or later. However, he advises Shin to be careful, and Shin understands, as no one would willingly eat his food if they knew about his ability. The hero knows he'll still need to use it occasionally, carefully ensuring it isn't detected. With that settled, they set a date to put their plans into action. In the end, it all happens faster than expected. Sometime later, the new assistant finishes his work quickly enough to earn praise. The hero then brings out the same treat as before, this time for the young man. The moment he sees it, the man recognizes it as the famous chef's ice cream. The hero asks if the rumor has spread, and the man explains that those who tried it couldn't stop boasting. Shin apologizes for not offering it to everyone, but the man understands that the process takes time. When he takes his first bite, the man praises the flavor, saying he now understands everyone's reaction. The hero, in turn, feels pleased, but to him it was obvious the dish would be delicious given the effort he put into it. What the man is eating is an even more special version made with no skipping on ingredients. After finishing the meal, the man praises it again and thanks Shin, saying it's been a long time since he got something so good. Then the hero decides to start asking questions, and the man agrees to answer what he can. Shin begins by asking why he questioned his job last time. Without hesitation, the man replies that he needed to confirm if there was an awakened individual, because if there was, they'd have to change their strategy. Hearing this, he felt relieved when the chef said there wasn't anyone awakened. The hero, however, had a feeling this might happen, and the man was already speaking more than he should. The man's mouth seemed to move on its own, which left him panicked. Then Shin asks what they would have done if there were awakened individuals, and the survivor admits that if there were many, they'd act discreetly and wait for the right chance. Shin understands but asks if the absence of awakened individuals lowered their guard. Again, without thinking, the man responds affirmatively, asking what's happening to his body. Realizing he's in trouble if he continues, he tries to flee. But the hero orders him to stop, saying there's one more question to ask. This forces the man to halt against his will and wait for the next question. Shin asks how many companions he has and who their leader is. Helplessly, the man reveals they have 5 awakened members, and their leader is Park. This immediately reminds the hero of the man who kept complaining about the lieutenant's absence. Shin then asks what the 5 were planning to do together, and the man confesses they intended to take over the unit. After observing for days, the group decided there were no awakened individuals or significant threats in the base. Thus, they plan to execute their operation that very night. The revelation startles the hero, but the man merely laughs, warning that the operation will begin as soon as he returns. Thinking this can't be happening, Shin braces himself as the man prepares to attack him. The survivor summons his powers, which are fire-based, creating a spiral of flames. Initially, the man was confused about his body's reaction, but now believes he has no reason to fear a mere cook. Shin didn't expect his assistant to attack him suddenly. But with their plans exposed and identities revealed, the man feels compelled to eliminate the cook. As a fireball approaches, Shin warns the survivor he's underestimating the power of a chef. A good cook is well acquainted with fire, and Shin possesses a skill to counter it. Using his low-level fire affinity, the hero disperses the flames, proving the man chose the wrong opponent. The man begins to despair, unable to believe his ability was neutralized so easily. Now Shin declares there's no reason to hide anymore. Using the chef's eye, the system highlights all the weak points of the primate before him. Before anything else, the hero advises the man to prepare himself. Enraged, the man demands to know what's happening, but Shin doesn't give him a chance to think and charges forward, slicing him with his chef's knife. Later that evening, the rest of the group gathers, puzzled by Changjung's absence. Their leader, however, keeps a serious expression, anticipating trouble. After some time, the leader announces they won't wait any longer and will proceed without Chan-jung. One of the survivors questions if they can do this since Chan-jung is the strongest among them. In response, the blonde leader yells that they still have 4 awakened individuals against none on the other side. Yet one of the troublemakers believes they might have miscalculated. Chan-jung, currently at level 6, possesses exceptional abilities vital to the group. However, Park, as the group leader, must remain resolute. He questions whether his companion trusts him, assuring that Chan-jung will join them later. Park is already very irritated, and because of this, he tells everyone to hurry as they need to gather all the people from the dormitory. Once everyone arrives at the base's courtyard, people begin to complain about being dragged there in the middle of the night. Lee is also annoyed and asks Park what he is up to, but he merely responds that he likes leading others. Park has always been particularly grumpy and violent, but he is relatively polite in front of Lee. This prompts Lee to ask if he isn't satisfied being just the big brother of their group. In response, Park states that a group of 5 people is far too small for him. He adds that while the survivor group is also small, with the entire unit under his control, he'd finally be satisfied. Hearing this, Lee starts to understand the intentions of her group member. While the two argue, the other civilians complain loudly about the situation they are in. Inside the building, the soldiers question what the survivors are doing outside. One of them explains that the survivors just came down and started arguing. Obviously, the other soldiers dislike this, feeling that as long as the survivors are on the base, they should follow orders. Outside, Lee admits that she had a feeling the boys would cause trouble one day. Feeling cornered, she pulls out her scissors from her pockets, prepared to use force. This frightens the civilians, who begin to wonder if these men are crazy for picking such a fight. However, Park doesn't back down as he already knows the power of the scissors well. Lee is confused as to why Park believes he can take her on with only 4 regular people. But before she can think further, a second group member steps forward, saying he will handle her alone. Knowing Lee's strength, the leader sends a 3rd member to join the fight as backup. Lee realizes that everyone seems overly confident even knowing her abilities. She deduces they are all awakened, which indeed turns out to be the case. This revelation terrifies the survivors, who realize they've been deceived all along. Without further delay, Park shouts that since Lee won't back down, the fight must begin. Strategically, the 2 warriors charge toward the unarmed civilians. As their leader, Lee steps forward to defend against the attack. Simultaneously, the second member provides support, attacking with mysterious golden balls. Fortunately, Lee manages to cut them all down, though she grows increasingly concerned about the level of her opponents. Faced with 2 awakened opponents, Lee begins to question whether she stands a chance. Among the panicking civilians, the gang's leader remains confident about overcoming this obstacle. With a powerful punch, the second in command mocks Lee for being adept only at fighting zombies. The other commands his colleague to stop playing around and fight seriously. To Lee, it's clear that their teamwork is poor, and she sees a possible opening to gain the upper hand. The second attacker leaps toward Lee, aiming to finish her quickly. Both warriors have reached level 4, and they believe there's no way they can lose to a non-combatant awakened individual. At that moment, a loud noise echoes across the base, causing everyone to pause and look around. The noise is a warning shot fired by one of the soldiers, who then demands an explanation for the chaos. The 3 fighters immediately raise their hands without hesitation. The unit representative orders everyone to stop, but Park questions what will happen if they don't. The soldier makes it clear that he will open fire, prompting Park to laugh, finding the idea of a soldier shooting at civilians amusing. In response to the taunt, the soldier states that this is an exception, as any identified threat must be eliminated. In his thoughts, Park wonders if this soldier is the leader and realizes there might be more awakened individuals hiding among the unit. Calmly, Park remarks that if they are threatened, they'll have to respond in kind. At this moment, Park is still uncertain whether the survivors will dare confront armed soldiers. He knows the Awakened are strong, but not yet strong enough to overpower firearms. As he walks toward the soldiers, Park taunts them to go ahead and shoot, and he begins mocking the lack of courage among these young recruits who join at 20 years old. Obviously, the soldiers think the boy is crazy, and one of them asks leader Seo Sunyuk to make a decision. Seo clarifies that he has already made it clear what will happen. He pulls the trigger to fulfill his duty, but as everyone watches in shock, the bullet doesn't fire. Park is genuinely surprised that Seo attempted to shoot and retracts his statement about all of them being children. In Seo's mind, however, none of this makes sense, as the weapon was functioning just moments ago. With a smirk, Park explains that the gun isn't broken and that Seo will understand once he learns about his ability. Park's profession is arsonist, and one of his skills is to interfere with fire-related phenomena nearby. Seo is of course stunned, and his subordinate reports that the other soldiers' weapons are also malfunctioning. Park elaborates that he can disrupt fire, and since rifles are firearms dependent on combustion, they don't work either. With so many soldiers surrounding him, Seo realizes that the group has prepared for this confrontation, having planned during the conversation. Because of this, the 2 troublemakers lavish praise on their older brother. However, Lee knows well that if things continue this way, the unit will soon fall. After disarming the soldiers, Park yells for the entire squad to kneel. But the soldiers whisper among themselves that if Park's power is solely fire interference, there's no reason to fear him. One of them asks Seo what they should do, and Seo suggests assigning 4 soldiers to handle the 4 troublemakers. Seo advises using their numerical advantage, and the leader agrees but assigns extra support to Lee's side. Park declares that the number of normal people doesn't matter when fighting an awakened individual. Seo ignores him and orders Hanel and Daewon to handle the situation. In response, Park grows serious and threatens to kill a few soldiers to set an example, starting with the confident ones. But before he can finish speaking, a fist flies toward him at lightning speed. Without any chance to defend himself, Park takes a direct hit to the face. Still conscious, Park realizes he's been outsmarted and that there is an awakened soldier among them. With the gang leader on the ground, everyone is stunned. Even Lee didn't expect an awakened soldier to be among the troops. As Park lies unconscious from a single punch, the soldier mocks him, calling him weak. The second troublemaker can't comprehend what made Park think he could act like this. In response, Seo admits with surprise that the unit is becoming truly strong. With the situation under control, all those not needing medical attention are dismissed to their dormitories. Seo coordinates the soldiers under his command while the troublemakers are restrained. At that moment, Surgeon Hyung rushes in and Seo reports that nothing serious happened. Regarding the conflict among the survivors, Seo explains that there were 5 additional awakened individuals beyond Lee. He adds that they not only deceived everyone but attempted to seize the unit by force, though they pose no significant threat. Kwang notices the blonde troublemaker from the meeting and realizes that everything unfolded just as the hero predicted. The 4 made their move without realizing they were walking into a trap. Seo mentions that the 5th troublemaker is still missing, but at that moment, the protagonist appears, carrying him on his back. After dragging the man from far away, the hero is exhausted and surprised to find everything already resolved. He drops the troublemaker on the ground and Hyung commends him for his excellent work. The hero tries to downplay the situation, but the soldiers praise Shin's fighting abilities, which are clearly improving. The survivors are visibly shaken, as the man lying there is Chan-jung, the strongest among their group. Hyung thinks Shin may have gone too far, but the hero assures him that he was as gentle as possible. The ingredient discernment ability begins by cutting off the airway and draining blood, but its downside is an excessively high thirst for blood. Fortunately, the protagonist switched to the fish preparation illumination, which allowed him to subdue the boy without killing him. From now on, Shin will be able to subdue humans without taking their lives, and with everything resolved, Hyung expresses disappointment in the troublemaker's strength. Based on what he's seen so far, Kwang estimates the group's average level to be 3. Meanwhile, the military has about 6 newly awakened individuals at the same level. Kwang comments on Shin's level, which has already surpassed the 10th, and about the tokens still held by each member. Additionally, the stats receive a fixed boost, making a level 1 equivalent to level 5 instantly. It's said that efficiency will gradually decrease, but regardless, the hero thanks the group for their hard work. Hyun, however, refuses to take all the credit, saying they only got this far because of the protagonist. Interrupting the conversation, Lee brings up the topic of the soldiers also being awakened. The hero is happy to see she's doing well, and Lee explains that it's only thanks to the soldiers' care. Shin feels relieved, and Lee remarks that without the soldiers' help, they'd all be lost. Regardless, the hero apologizes for keeping everything a secret, but explains that caution was necessary. Lee has no problem with this and understands completely, so the protagonist also reveals that half of the unit is already awakened. In his thoughts, the hero believes it's better to reveal everything now, so he mentions the girl's profession. He shares that he is a chef, but also works on other tasks. The next day, in the basement, Shin asks the guard if anything seems different. The soldier explains they thought the troublemakers had tried to escape, but it appeared they didn't even attempt it. Shin asks where the room is, and the soldier points to a room at the end of the corridor. In this case, the hero asks where they should start the interrogation. The soldier wonders if Shin will be okay handling it alone, and Shin reassures him, saying this is his specialty. Entering Chan-jung's room, the boy is terrified, so his chef assures him he's only there to talk. Without delay, the hero says he's here to ask some questions and asks if Chan-jung will listen. Chan-jung kneels, begging for his life and saying he'll do whatever is asked. This surprises Shin, as he didn't expect his punch to have caused such trauma. Thus, Shin explains that if Chan-jung cooperates, he won't be beaten again. But before that, Shin pulls out some ice cream and says Chan-jung must eat it first. After the interrogation, the protagonist is pleased with the effects of the confession ice cream. It makes the person honest and forthcoming, leading Chan-jung to confess that he and his colleagues were criminals. Chan-jung explains that as information about Awakening spread, it became harder to expand influence, so the group submitted to the blonde leader. The criminal hid the fact he was awakened and joined Lee's group. Taking power from others wasn't easy, but one of the group members specialized in tarnishing reputations. In the end, these criminals were meticulous and tried to expand their influence covertly. Chan-jung also admits that this is why the unit was targeted. It was a big prize and could provide weapons. Now the hero understands Taejun's prediction about hiding strength. If the group had known the battalion's potential from the start, they would have acted more cautiously, expanding slowly. Bringing survivors to the unit was risky, and Shin now wonders what to do with these people. Later, the lieutenant reports that he reassured the survivors as instructed. He adds there's nothing significant to note, as everyone is now quite calm. As expected of an officer, Shin is very pleased to have someone so useful and persuasive under his command. The lieutenant asks if his performance was good, and Shin confirms it was. In this case, Kim nervously requests a few snacks as a reward. This worries the hero, noticing Kim's withdrawal symptoms worsening. When Shin doesn't respond immediately, Kim apologizes, saying 3 meals a day are enough. But the hero agrees to prepare a snack to reward the officer's work, which makes Kim extremely grateful. Shin instructs Kim to wait in the dining hall, and Kim happily skips off like a child. Witnessing this strange behavior, the hero considers putting the other 5 criminals under the same dependency. After all, they're dead weight if left alone, and Shin isn't eager to kill humans. Even so, as he cooks, he realizes he needs to take action soon. Later, Shin appears before the blonde with a tray full of delicious food. With the first bite, the once stern and grumpy man smiles like never before. Naturally, the hero does the same for the entire group and earns the Reform achievement, granted when an evil group is subdued by the power of cooking. Additionally, the protagonist receives the title of Reform Chef, which increases food effectiveness by 30% for monsters and malicious people. Now these former criminals will join the unit as its newest members. The next day, the group salutes the other soldiers and assists with all the daily tasks. Seeing this, Shin asks how the newcomers are doing, and Kwang reports that they are adapting well, despite being a bit older. Everything seems resolved without issues, so the hero announces that they will remain novices until their reform is complete. At that moment, Hyung runs in, desperate to speak with Shin, prompting the hero to ask what's going on. The surgeon explains there's something Shin needs to see immediately. By now, the unit has collected all the remaining fuel, but without counting the vehicle's reserves, the generator will only run for another week. This is a critical issue since they're running out of food and electricity. To Shin, however, this was inevitable since the arrival of the survivors derailed all original plans. One of the soldiers asks what they should do, and Shin states they will prepare to leave the unit. Later that night, Hyung remarks that he now understands why Shin asked them to skip dinner. A variety of beautiful, fresh dishes have been prepared for the soldiers to cater to every taste. But as they take the first bite, Shin reveals that the meal is actually made from lizard meat. This instantly transforms their enthusiasm into outright panic. Obviously, Hyung angrily questions why Shin is feeding them lizard meat. The hero explains that until now, they've only fought lizards with known weaknesses. However, according to Miss Lee, there are many different types of monsters outside, including zombies and humanoid creatures. In this case, everyone needs to be prepared, and Hyung agrees but still doesn't understand why they need to eat lizard meat. Shin clarifies that the unit's food supplies are almost gone, except for a minimal amount of combat rations. The soldiers can still buy rye bread from the shop to stave off hunger, but it costs points and is difficult to cook. Fortunately, monster meat contains magic, making it highly effective. Ultimately, Shin argues that eating monster meat is their best option. Kev understands but points out that many won't like it, especially the lizard meat, as everyone saw their comrades killed in battle. The hero acknowledges this, which is why he's carefully managing everyone's mental state with meals. Without this effort, the entire unit would have collapsed under severe trauma. Even now, Shin struggles to keep things under control. Eating monsters that eat humans will undoubtedly be hard to accept. Still, Shin remains steadfast, asserting they can't worry about that now. As he said before, the unit's primary goal is survival. Thus, they must decide whether to be eaten by monsters or to eat them to survive. With seriousness, Shin asks for his soldiers' trust. The next day, Hyung gathers everyone for the special meal prepared by Shin. The soldiers express relief at finally eating something fresh. Of some doubt, it's really monster meat. However, after tasting it, their opinions change completely. The meal surpasses expectations and even boosts their stats. It's undoubtedly incomparable to anything they had before. Hyung enthusiastically comments that the plan is working, and Shin agrees, although some soldiers are still hesitant. The surgeon assures the hero not to worry because he knows everyone will eventually eat it. To liven up the atmosphere, Hyung shouts for everyone to hear that they can't end the party like this, so he calls for the hidden soju and beer. He explains that after every department meeting, he'd stash some drinks away, which excites the battalion. With laughter, the soldiers bring out the crates, and the military's celebration begins. Shin was very pleased, as it had been a long time since he had seen everyone so happy. Suddenly, Miss Lee appeared in the background, surprising the hero. The girl explained that she hadn't seen soldiers in the living quarters and came over after hearing some noise. Shin tried to explain what was happening, assuring her that it wasn't something they intended to impose on the survivors. After all, it would be problematic if the civilians thought the good things were reserved for the soldiers while the bad were left for everyone else. Lee, however, had already heard about the monster meat, and though it seemed strange, she could understand. Such measures were inevitable for survival, but regardless, the girl had a request to make. Unexpectedly, she asked to formally include all the survivors in the unit. The hero found it strange that the civilians also wanted to participate in combat. However, Lee explained that while being protected wasn't bad, they needed to learn how to defend themselves for future dangers. This attitude made the hero proud, as it showed she was now thinking like a true leader. Nevertheless, Shin said it was still a sudden request, but Lee clarified that they had been discussing it since Chang's betrayal. This made sense to the hero, as without their interference, the civilians wouldn't have been able to stop him. In this case, Shin asked if she had considered the opinions of the others, to which she confidently replied that she had. Thus, Shin explained that they were trained soldiers, meaning that by joining, the civilians would need to follow orders from their superiors. Lee didn't mind, as from what she had seen so far, Lieutenant Kim seemed competent enough to lead them. The only thing she didn't know was that Kim was only acting this way because he was following Shin's orders. The hero decided to explain that later. Understanding Lee's request now, Shin said he would discuss it with his superiors and inform her of the conclusion later. Lee smiled and thanked him, assuring him that everyone would do their best not to slow down the unit. After everything, the hero informed the others about the girl's request, leaving everyone in disbelief. Seo asked if it wouldn't be too much of a burden, considering they were already struggling. However, it was clear that they couldn't just leave the civilians defenseless, doomed to die as soon as they left. In this case, Seo questioned whether all the survivors had truly agreed to this. Shin confirmed that they had and that they were ready to fight in the same war. Certainly, there were many risks involved and the soldiers couldn't predict the dangers ahead. Yet they had to join forces to protect the civilians and survive together. This, after all, was their duty as humans and as soldiers, effectively ending the debate. Later, the girl asked the hero to check what she had prepared. Seeing that Lee had single-handedly produced so many military uniforms, the protagonist realized how serious she was. These uniforms were crafted from monster leather, with command combat sets made from the leader's hide and others from the regular monsters. Lee explained that since the lizards had strong defensive power, she used this to their advantage. Though the scales were tough, they were a bit thick, so she reinforced only the critical areas. She then asked if the hero wanted to try one on. When he did, the uniform granted several effects due to being crafted by a novice tailor. The system stated that the clothing significantly increased physical resistance and improved attribute resistance. The protagonist thought this was incredible, especially when paired with the boosts from the meals. Lee praised how the hero looked and he thanked her, saying the outfit was very comfortable. Changing the subject, Shin asked why she chose gray for the uniform's color. She explained that she thought they might go to the city someday, so she decided to make different versions. Additionally, the uniforms for officers and soldiers varied, with the leader's uniforms being slightly more resistant. In this case, Shin quickly clarified that he was the unit's commander, leaving Lee confused. Although it was a bit late, the protagonist decided to explain everything to her. Once she learned the secrets, she would be fully integrated into the unit. Thus, the hero revealed everything he knew to her, and since only the veterans were aware, asked her to keep it a secret. Later, outside the building, the soldiers gathered to check the uniforms. Naturally, they were thrilled since this type of material would make it much easier to avoid injuries. Everyone seemed excited and the leaders thanked Lee, but she mentioned it was only possible with the help of others. For the warriors who needed more defense, she designed the uniforms to accommodate armor underneath. For the sword-wielding shooters, she added pouches for extra magazines. For the hero who used a sword, she attached a sheath to the belt. Lee also set aside uniforms for the lieutenant and Tajun, and the hero volunteered to deliver them. Switching topics, the hero suggested that Lee make a uniform for herself as well. This was because she was officially the representative of the survivors, acting almost like a squad leader. However, she questioned whether being a representative of the survivors still meant anything after joining the unit. The protagonist replied that it didn't, but added that they were about to leave the unit. To elaborate, Shin explained that once they left, they would encounter other survivors seeking refuge. Thus, the soldiers would need her to manage those survivors. In response, Lee understood and was pleased to be entrusted with such an important position. Blushing, Hyun praised Lee, saying she was excellent and would do well in the role. For personal experience, Shin affirmed that the girl would adapt to the position. The hero also shared how overwhelmed he felt when he was suddenly named leader, but humans are adaptable creatures. On that note, Seo handed Lee a K5 pistol. Typically, these pistols were issued to field officers or in special cases like order officers. When the monsters attacked, the unit lost its battalion commander, the order officer, and the military doctor, leaving these pistols unclaimed. Lee, however, had never handled such a weapon before, so Seo took charge of giving her a quick lesson. Kwon then asked who the other two pistols would be assigned to. Hyun explained that one was given to the lieutenant for the dignity of his rank and because he lacked combat abilities. Then the battalion commander himself planned to use the remaining one. Shin explained that he had been using a blade, but it had its limits. Since he wasn't combat-oriented, he decided to use a pistol instead. Kwon, however, didn't seem too pleased with this, but Hyun reassured him, saying a low-caliber weapon like that wouldn't make much difference against them. A few days later, another soldier awakened, bringing the number of awakened members to 100, completing the requirements to form a guild. The system informed them that a guild is a structured society and therefore positions and rules must be established. This made it the perfect time for Shin to suggest leaving the base. When the suggestion to abandon the base and move out was made, as expected, many were worried. Several soldiers argued that it would be dangerous for ordinary people to survive in the wilderness with so many monsters around. Though there were no direct objections, many others trembled with anxiety. Still, remaining locked in the unit would eventually drive the soldiers mad, and to ensure survival, leaving was necessary. Some, like Hyun, understood the situation and asked what they should do. For our hero, the only possible choice was to prepare another meal full of courage. With all the survivors gathered, the hero thought it was indeed a large group, but it also felt just right. Thanks to the protagonist, everyone was united and Hyung suggested they take the next step. There was still much to decide, so the system informed them that the leader could appoint deputies to divide the guild's responsibilities. Deputies could handle administration and communicate remotely via messages. However, the guild name had not yet been decided and the system asked the hero to choose one. As expected, the military was the first to form a guild, which wasn't surprising given how hard it was to gather 100 awakened individuals. Moreover, they received the dragon's tooth as a reward for their achievements. For now, the hero decided to focus on appointing deputies and naming the guild. Using a megaphone, Shin announced that as everyone knew, the guild had grown to 100 awakened members. They were the first in the country, and the protagonist congratulated everyone, assuring them that as they grew stronger, they would move forward with confidence. Before leaving the base, there were a few things to organize. The hero explained that as the guild grew, deputies would be appointed with 5 positions available. Being appointed as a deputy would enhance the emblem skill's buff effect, and the protagonist made it clear that he would select 5 deputies. Once outside, moving as a single group would be challenging, so sub-commanders would be needed. The soldiers' lives were at stake, so the appointments had to be carefully considered. As the guild master, the hero could appoint members at will, but he wanted to hear others' opinions. Fortunately, after much discussion, there were no significant disagreements within the unit. The senior members Shin had in mind, including the Miss, were indispensable. The biggest issue was Tae-jun, who was in a wheelchair. Because of this, people began questioning if there wasn't someone better suited, as despite being a good person, the sergeant could barely walk. The hero understood the soldiers' concerns. In response, Shin announced that Sergeant Park Tae-jun would not leave the base. Naturally, the soldiers were upset since they had just been told they would leave. Even the senior members were confused and Hyung questioned Shin. The hero explained that the mountains were the group's only base, and if all the troops left, they would lose the occupation effect. Moreover, the earlier message stated that as long as they maintained territorial control, they could earn occupation points. The more and longer they controlled, the more points they could accumulate. Currently, the military didn't know how these points would be used, but it seemed this game revolved around territorial battles. Tae-jun then asked for the megaphone and after receiving it, reminded everyone that his job was as an astronomer. The better the visibility of the stars, the more effectively he could use his skills, and few places offered a better view than the base. For this reason, he decided to stay to collect and relay information, acting as the unit's radar. Additionally, 7 other soldiers volunteered to stay and form the detection squad. Thanks to Tae-jun's speech, there were no more objections, and thus the 5 guild deputies were chosen. With this, the new command structure was established, and most importantly, the guild's name was also decided. At the start, the soldiers suggested names like Gangwon Liberation Front, but they knew they wouldn't stay confined to Gangwon. Another suggestion was Knights of the Round Table, but someone else thought Steel Unit sounded better. This was because the first monster they fought was also a steel lizard. However, after much discussion, the name that resonated most was Steel Legion. Now that they were ready to depart, Hyung asked where they should head, and Siu suggested either east or west. Him pointed out that the western region included large cities like Chuncheon, offering a lot of territory. Additionally, there were other military bases in that broad area. On the other hand, the eastern Yeongdong region housed the superior unit and was closer to the sea. The question then became whether to expand into a larger territory or seek out the superior unit. This made it difficult to decide, so Shin suggested letting Tae-jun choose. A few days later, at the beginning of the evening, everyone gathered to leave the base. Among the sub-commanders and their many subordinates stood Shin. The day before the unit's departure, the senior officers were discussing the fact that they still hadn't secured the entire mountain area. To aid in the effort, they prepared a map for the mission. Hyung mentioned it would be a good idea to familiarize themselves with the area before leaving. However, Kwon questioned the meaning of the spots marked with an X. The surgeon explained that those were locations where monsters had recently been sighted. Seo couldn't hide his surprise at how numerous they were. Considering they were still encountering monsters daily, the number was indeed daunting. In the end, the departure was proving to be a headache since, instead of diminishing, the number of monsters kept increasing. Additionally, recent reports described monsters with bizarre forms beyond just lizards. Without knowing these monsters' weaknesses, dealing with them without mercenary-level firepower seemed impossible. Hyun then asked Lee how she had reached the base and whether she encountered obstacles along the way. She explained that there were monsters, but not nearly as many as being mentioned now. Throughout her journey, she had to deal with only 1 or 2 monsters, none of which were lizards. Since Lee had managed to defeat them on her own, Hyun believed they wouldn't pose much of a problem. In response, Shin suggested this was likely due to the chief effect, which piqued everyone's curiosity. It was true that they encountered survivors 2 days after defeating the chief. These survivors had entered the mountains when the number of lizards was significantly lower than usual. Steele commented that conditions now were much worse than back then, especially with more soldiers and supplies to transport. That's why leaving the base required thorough planning, which Young agreed with, emphasizing they needed to prepare as much as possible. Later, the soldiers left the base in military vehicles. Upon reaching a designated area, Kwang ordered the perimeter defense to begin. Another commander directed the vehicles carrying survivors to move inside first, while some soldiers held the rear. By this point, everyone was executing the plan, and Shin noted that although maintaining formation was difficult, their experience would ensure success. This was a classic RPG strategy: tanks at the front, damage dealers, and healers in supportive roles. The large vehicles formed barriers at the front and rear, with melee fighters positioned nearby. Inside, long-range and support awakened soldiers protected the vehicles transporting survivors. The challenge was that they didn't know where the attacks might come from, and the narrow path made escape difficult. Shin stated the plan was to block any attack quickly, but Hyung insisted the best option was to exit the mountain quickly using the vehicles. The protagonist understood the concern, as the mountainous roads filled with unpaved paths, not to mention the cliffs along some sections, making regular travel extremely dangerous. Thus, moving quickly was the best option, but doing so could lead to the extermination of the entire battalion. With the formation ready, one of the soldiers asked if they should proceed. Minutes later, the vehicles moved along the path as soldiers checked the perimeter. The survivors remained in the most protected zone, while the commanders managed everything from the map outside. A soldier commented on the eerie silence near the base, prompting Kwang to warn that it wouldn't last. There was a territorial effect in play, but a strange noise signaled that it was about to end. The soldier nervously asked if the surgeon had heard it, and Kwang confirmed, ordering him to inform the main unit. As the soldiers sprinted into action, the lizard monsters also charged in large numbers, completely surrounding the vehicles. At that moment, all the survivors were safely inside the vehicles, so Shin commanded the soldiers to form up as they had practiced at the base. With a loud shout, Shin instructed the soldiers to focus on weak points to conserve energy and to avoid using rifles to minimize noise. The awakened soldiers quickly obeyed his orders. All the sub-commanders were eager to showcase their abilities, and Shin didn't hold back during the confrontation as well. Without wasting time, the monsters lunged at the formation, and the soldiers tried to hold their positions, preventing the beasts from breaking through. Amidst the chaos, Kwang reacted to a loud roar and delivered a powerful punch to one of the lizards. He quickly moved on, attacking 2 others, declaring that only a chief-level monster was worthy of his attention. Kwang decimated the beast with his punches and hurled it far away. However, he didn't anticipate the others climbing on the fallen bodies to reach the vehicles. Hyung, on the other hand, wasn't idle. He saved a comrade using his electric abilities. He shouted for everyone to stop relying on the barriers and instead pushed the monsters back to make climbing harder. During the fight, one awakened soldier defended with a barrier, while another struggled to keep the beasts away from the survivors. Despite being surrounded, the soldiers managed to maintain control of the situation. Inside the vehicles, the survivors could only hear the terrifying sounds of the battle, trembling with fear. Lee reminded herself of her role to assist and comforted the civilians, reassuring them that the soldiers would undoubtedly prevail. Outside, the surgeon enveloped one of his lightning bolts in a dark shroud, eliminating the beasts in his path. He threw one lifeless body onto the others attempting to climb. Despite this small victory, the battle was far from over, as another horde began approaching from the distance. This group was even larger than the first, with monsters charging from multiple directions. Hyun questioned where they were coming from, but Shin explained that once a battle begins, the noise continuously attracts more. Thus, if the soldiers had started shooting, they would have been overwhelmed by a tsunami of lizards. Since the new horde was still distant, Shin ordered the remaining monsters to be eliminated quickly so they could escape. From the general report, all the lizards at the rear had been killed, leaving only 2 near the survivors. Standing atop one of the vehicles, Shin shouted for the soldiers to use their combat snacks as a new swarm was on its way. At this, the soldiers pulled out the snacks prepared by their commander from their uniforms. One soldier even expressed relief, noting how tired he had become. Shin in turn called Hyung over to join him in eating a snack, as they would soon swap places with Kwang. After consuming the snacks, the system informed them that all attributes had increased by 5, with endurance being the primary boost. With that, Shin drew his cooking knife from its sheath and asked if the soldiers were ready. While preparing to move out, Shin reflected on the fact that he wouldn't be able to use this kitchen anymore. Once outside, creating a proper cooking environment would be both difficult and dangerous. A smell and smoke could reveal their location to enemies, and the cooking equipment would be severely limited. Until they established a stable base at the foot of the mountain, everyone would have to rely on combat rations. Still, the current supply wouldn't suffice for long, barely lasting a week for all the survivors. Thankfully, Shin had the combat rations ability, acquired upon reaching level 10. Combat rations had lower stats than regular meals but offered a long shelf life and excellent calorie density. Given their mobile situation, dehydrated meat was ideal for its portability. Additionally, there was no shortage of lizards, so Shin thought he could eventually transform packed lunches into proper rations. Back in the present, orders were issued to reposition everyone and rotate the injured soldiers. Furthermore, a barricade of lizard bodies was quickly constructed around the vehicles. Shin immediately instructed the team leaders to check on their members and report any damages. He then dashed off, telling Kyung he would return shortly. The fixed stat boosts and physical endurance from the dried meat were helpful, but it wasn't enough. With that in mind, Shin headed to Lieutenant Kim, surprising the officer. Without wasting time, the hero informed Kim that it was time to use his commander ability. Despite understanding, the lieutenant admitted that he was still a bit nervous. Nevertheless, he decided to try. As he unleashed his power, he shouted for everyone to prepare for battle. This created a command aura that resonated across all the soldiers in the region. The ability temporarily granted allied troops the battle-ready effect. Fighting in formation with a certain number of allies increased combat efficiency and granted immunity to confusion. This boost from the lieutenant elevated the attributes of his allies by a certain percentage. It synergized well with the fixed attribute increases from the meals and the courage effect. At this moment, the lizard monsters began to invade, prompting every region to be closely monitored. The battle was grueling, but the soldiers managed to hold on, confident that they could eventually escape. Each soldier engaged one or more monsters, but one was struck with a direct hit to the abdomen. Shin leaped down from above, plunging his knife into the chest of one of the beasts. He then pressed forward, cutting down every monster in his path. One of the creatures attempted to slice Shin in half, but he dodged and swiftly counterattacked. As he fought, the protagonist marveled at the buff's incredible effect, convinced that they could now overcome the crisis safely. However, the person receiving the most praise was Lee. When Shin noticed, he saw her handling 5 monsters simultaneously. The hero smiled, assuming she must have felt stifled inside the vehicle, but now was the time to end this battle. The lizards that weren't too damaged would later be used as food. Chaos ensued in the unit as a few soldiers suffered severe injuries. Kwang handled the monsters, Siu Hyuk was assigned to survey the area, and Hyung was tasked with checking on the survivors and ensuring a safe route. The battalion needed to leave before sunset. Everyone understood their roles, and Shin sheathed his knife for a moment. In total, there were about 10 injured, but thankfully, all seemed treatable. Thanks to the hero's meal effects, a reporting soldier expressed sincere gratitude. Despite this, Shin knew he still had much to improve. His current skill level was insufficient, limiting him to making dried meat, the most primitive form of combat rations. However, the fact that the effects could improve only motivated him further. His enthusiasm even surprised one of the soldiers. Additionally, with over 100 soldiers, the meal effects scaled with the number of people eating. Regardless, the soldiers needed to move quickly, so Shin ordered them to create space in the vehicles for those unable to move. With the immediate area relatively organized, Shin headed to a vehicle with reported issues. Upon arrival, the soldiers informed him that the vehicle could not be salvaged. Acknowledging the setback, Shin asked about the condition of the other vehicles. The soldiers assured him that the remaining ones were still operational due to their resilience. Even so, Shin wasn't thrilled as they had barely begun, and it was already challenging. The soldier added that they couldn't fully rely on the vehicles as they weren't armor or tanks and could be destroyed. For now, there was nothing they could do except look for salvageable materials. Thus, the soldiers decided to abandon the vehicle and use its parts. Later that night, everyone gathered. Some ate while others stood guard. The guild deputies joined Shin to discuss new strategies based on the map. After a long night, dawn arrived and the soldiers continued their journey toward the new region. At this moment, a soldier ran up, shouting for Shin to come quickly. Curious, the hero asked if something had been found, and the soldier confirmed. Upon arrival, Huang was already investigating as a section of the metal fence had been completely destroyed. Shin wondered aloud how this could have happened and whether it was the earlier lizards. Kwang agreed it was likely the case, but to Shin, it didn't seem like an accident. He noticed tire marks and immediately thought of the soldiers who had been sent outside. Clearly, there are signs that a vehicle fell there, prompting Shin to immediately request binoculars. After carefully focusing on the deepest part of the ravine, the hero spots a military vehicle. It's the same vehicle Jamin and Sumgo took for their mission. These are signs of a vehicular collision, so Shin informs everyone of his discovery. Hearing that this is where their friends perished leaves the soldiers deeply shaken. Shin, in turn, questions what on earth happened there. The first lieutenant made a grave error in allowing that mission, and even though they volunteered, Shin thought he should never have approved it. At that time, they weren't even awakened, leaving them defenseless against a monster attack. This realization made the hero think that if the two hadn't descended the mountain, they would still be alive. However, their bodies were nowhere to be seen despite the fact that they had died nearby. In this case, Kwang suggests that they might have survived and gone somewhere else, but Shin knows that falling from such a height would injure even an awakened soldier. This leads the hero to conclude that, unfortunately, the two had likely become lizard food. Shin truly feels remorse for the two, but he believes this is the most probable explanation. Still, he has a bad feeling about the situation, sensing that something worse is bound to happen. Regardless, Shin knows the unit doesn't have time to dwell on this. Later, Young expresses his surprise at the lack of bodies, and Shin admits he also can't understand why. In any case, they need to continue producing combat rations as supplies are running low. Hyun agrees, noting that they now have a significant stockpile of lizard meat. Ultimately, Shin knows he'll just have to cook on the move. The soldiers can't go without dried meat while in enemy territory. Minutes later, another horde of monsters appears from all directions to attack the battalion. Hyun urgently orders everyone to maintain their positions, warning that leaving them would spell disaster. Unfortunately for the surgeon, the sheer number of monsters is overwhelming the soldiers. Lee and the other guild deputies are also engaged, but it's unclear whether they'll be able to hold out. Meanwhile, from inside a truck, Shin races against time as this is already the group's fourth battle. He hasn't had a chance to step out since he's been making dried meat, and all he can do is hope for the best. Thankfully, the soldiers manage to fend off the monsters, but 5 are injured, with 1 in critical condition. This deeply worries Shin as they're gradually suffering more casualties. Thanks to the meals and Lieutenant Kim's buff, the soldiers' stats have improved despite their constant fatigue. However, the noise from the battles keeps drawing more monsters to the area. Switching topics, Hyun informs Shin of some complaints about his absence in the fights. The hero understands the point but knows his combat skills are average compared to the warriors. Thus, dedicating himself to producing combat rations is the best contribution he can make. Hyun assures him he isn't among the critics and promises to silence those who are speaking out. Still, Shin isn't sure it'll be as simple as the surgeon claims. Suddenly, a soldier urgently calls out to both of them, reporting something strange on the road, prompting them to investigate. The 3 rush to a cave, and upon arrival, they are left in complete disbelief. Inside the cave are 2 soldiers, grotesquely transformed into zombies. Shin is shocked to see them still wearing military uniforms, and naturally, everyone is horrified. After examining the unit tags on their uniforms, Kwang realizes that these zombies are Jamin and Sung-ho, the very corporals who had gone on the reconnaissance mission ordered by Lieutenant Kim. The hero definitely hadn't anticipated this, and Hinong quickly steps in to issue orders. With a shout, the surgeon commands the soldiers to move forward and bring the survivors into the vehicles. However, upon looking through the binoculars again, Kwang notices that the zombies are armed and advancing toward the unit, throwing the soldiers into total shock. Apparently, even after death, Jamin and Sung-ho's zombie forms can still handle firearms. Without delay, everyone is ordered to take cover and prepare to intercept the gunfire. After a frantic scramble, the zombies begin firing at the soldiers, who thankfully manage to defend themselves using tactical shields. However, several shots hit the vehicles and one strikes Minchul squarely in the chest. The hero is desperate and promises to call a medic as quickly as possible. Yet despite the excruciating pain, the soldier grabs Shin and informs him that the uniform saved his life. This leaves the protagonist immensely relieved. Naturally, the soldiers ask Shin to double-check, and he is deeply impressed with the quality of the uniforms. Even with the chaotic gunfire from the zombies, no fatal injuries have occurred. However, the monsters continue advancing but are now unable to shoot. Faced with this, the soldiers speculate among themselves that the zombies are likely out of ammunition. Hyung laughs, remarking that they probably lack the intelligence to reload their rifles. The surgeon orders the warrior squad to strike before the zombies can act further. Kwang leads the charge, with 2 others joining the fray. Unexpectedly, the soldiers defeat the zombies with surprising ease. Within seconds, the situation is completely under control. Still, Kwang feels uneasy about fighting former comrades who have turned into enemies. At the battle's end, Shin and Hyun agree that the crisis is resolved, but they remain emotionally shaken. At that moment, a flock of crows takes flight, cawing as if frightened by something. Everyone begins questioning what's happening as the mountain suddenly feels restless. The soldiers can even sense vibrations in the ground. Hyung nervously asks if this is what he thinks it is, and Shin confirms, explaining that the gunfire has drawn every monster in the area. In response, the surgeon asks what they should do. Knowing there's no time for hesitation, Shin declares that their cautious approach is over. He orders the marksmen and mages to remove all power restrictions and prepare for an all-out assault. At this point, the unit must use everything they have to survive. Shin directs long-range awakened soldiers to the 2.5-ton truck to provide support. The warriors are tasked with sprinting ahead and eliminating any approaching monsters. He emphasizes that if they can make it out of the mountain range, their chances of survival will greatly improve. This prompts everyone to rush to their positions as quickly as possible. Shin checks with the driver, who estimates it will take 30 minutes to escape the area. He then places a marksman in the passenger seat for added defense. With that, all soldiers except the warriors board the vehicles while marksmen position themselves atop them. As preparations finalize, Shin braces himself, determined to leave this place alive. However, this would become the unit's most challenging battle yet, as monsters of all shapes and sizes, not just lizards, begin closing in. As the monsters approach, the warriors engage the first wave. From a distance, Shin shouts for them to keep the path ahead clear. The warriors hold the line, and with a powerful charge, Kwang knocks monsters down like bowling pins. After dispatching them, Kwang warns that the vehicles are slowing down and calls for help from the other warriors. Meanwhile, atop the vehicles, marksmen are hard at work. Cook shouts for more ammunition, prompting a support soldier to rush to supply him. Suddenly, the support soldier notices a new horde of monsters descending the ravine. These are wolf-like monsters, immediately putting the soldiers on edge with their intimidating appearance. One soldier calls Shin to witness the scene, explaining that these creatures seem far stronger than the lizards. Seeing them, the protagonist is left in complete shock. The monsters have 6 limbs and are so fast that the warriors are struggling to get close. Moreover, they appear ravenously hungry. It's clear that these monsters resemble wild animals much more than the lizards did. Faced with this new threat, Shin wonders aloud what they should do, realizing that moving with the vehicles will be incredibly challenging. At that moment, inspiration strikes him. At the front lines, barrier-wielding warriors give their all to halt the monsters' advance. Due to the wolves' strength, one of the warriors warns that they can't hold much longer. Before disaster strikes, however, several pieces of meat are suddenly thrown into the fray. As soon as the meat scatters around the wolves, their attention shifts and they pounce on the food. The fact that the wolves were more focused on the lizard meat surprises one of the soldiers. Since they still have plenty in stock, the hero decides they will continue tossing out the meat as a distraction. However, this behavior was not unexpected by the protagonist. Initially, the monsters surrounded the group as if ready to eliminate them, but calmed down upon seeing the meat. This clearly distinguishes them from the lizards, which plan their attacks more strategically. If there's food in front of them, the wolves will go for it. And if Shin uses this time to identify their weaknesses, the unit can easily prevail. By analyzing the ingredients, the low-level cooking secret reveals the wolves' vulnerability. When distracted, they become extremely fragile and disorganized. The lizard meat, meanwhile, works perfectly as bait, allowing the marksman to finish them off during this time. After some effort, the soldiers manage to overcome this new crisis. Shin reflects that using lizard meat could similarly deceive other monsters. Thanks to this strategy, the unit successfully handles several crises that arise with relative ease. By adding his special chef's sauce to the lizard meat, Shin enhances its distracting effects even further. They'd also discover that the higher the quality of the dish, the stronger the effect. After luring the new monsters with the meat, Shin uses his chef's eye to identify weak points and directs the warriors accordingly. This time, the horde's weakness is their legs, and everyone follows the sergeant's instructions. Once again, the battalion handles the situation with ease. Later, as the unit continues advancing, some soldiers can already see the end of the mountain path. This sight leaves some concerned, others relieved, and Hyun particularly excited. However, despite sharing their enthusiasm, Shin struggles to express it. In his mind, the hero realizes he may have overused his abilities. His eyes hurt and his head spins, making him feel mana depleted for the first time. He collapses to the ground, leaving the entire battalion in a state of panic over their commander's condition. After some time, the hero wakes up in a bed, drenched in cold sweat. Kyung sits beside him, asking if he's okay. Shin weakly replies that he feels like he's dying, but immediately inquires about their current location. Kyung explains that they found an empty farmhouse and decided to set up camp nearby. Focusing on what matters, the surgeon offers Shin some porridge he made using combat rations. However, Shin quickly notices that Hyun just tossed everything onto a tray and boiled it. Hyun reports that after leaving the mountains, monsters appeared, but the unit managed to deal with them. Shin asks if the surgeon remembered to bring back the monster carcasses. Hyun confirms this, noting that he knows how valuable the meat and hides are as resources. At the moment, Kwang and others are outside retrieving them, while Lee is helping with resource production. Everyone is working hard, and just then, a soldier enters to announce the return of the exploration team. Hyun advises Shin to keep resting while he handles it. However, Shin insists on getting up and taking care of things himself. Initially, Ta-jun had suggested heading west, claiming they would find more opportunities there. However, Soo-hyuk perceives this direction as a death trap, describing the area as an outright hellscape. The chaos caused by monsters draws even more of them, and humans killed by the creatures turn into zombies. Currently, the village is overrun with zombies and beasts, making the situation dire. Shin acknowledges that entering this monster nest would put them at a severe disadvantage. Furthermore, the numerous buildings and vehicles would obstruct the unit's view and make movement beyond the roads extremely difficult. Despite this, the soldiers are reluctant to abandon the idea. Shin suggests they proceed only after reinforcing their strength and healing the injured. The guild's 2 healers are barely keeping up, and any further injuries could lead to fatalities. Soo-hyuk asks what their next move will be, prompting the hero to contemplate. Suddenly, Shin comes up with the idea of heading to the unit's own barracks. Kellen immediately agrees, noting that the barracks will have many useful resources. Unlike urban areas, the barracks are in open fields and not too far away, making the journey relatively safer. Now that they are in the open fields, securing a base of operations is crucial, so this location could definitely serve as their new base. Finally, the heroes suggest creating a plan before sunset with all high-ranking members. In the end, they decide not to move all the troops at once, but instead divide into 3 squads, each led by a captain. Since firearms cannot be used, a marksman will remain at the cabin. Additionally, they need to conserve their dwindling ammunition, which Hyuk agrees with. Lee is also named as squad leader, and while she feels uncertain about leading the troops, this is a good opportunity for growth. Given that she is one of the few who survived in the city, the hero knows her knowledge of urban areas is invaluable. Although many disagree, the protagonist also includes a survivor with awakened abilities in each group. These individuals have been fully conditioned and will do whatever is necessary as long as they receive a snack afterward. With this arrangement, the hero hopes nothing goes wrong while they are away. The following morning, Shin announces that to avoid attracting attention, the groups will split up and take different routes to meet at the destination. Everyone follows the orders, and Shin informs them they are departing now, with the civilians wishing them good luck. After walking for some time, Shin decides to ask why survivors are mostly found in cities. Lee responds that they had no other choice, as cities were the only places where food could be found. Monsters and zombies were terrifying, but hunger was even worse. Lee expressed gratitude for never missing a meal at the barracks, because before that, every day was more challenging than the last. Shin then asks if surviving in the city was difficult. Recalling his earlier comments about buildings obstructing the view, Lee explains that this wasn't a problem for them. Survivors could hide and move between structures whenever danger arose. This strategy obviously wouldn't work in open fields, where they would eventually be caught. Shin realizes that what he considered a disadvantage was actually an advantage for ordinary people. Changing the subject, the hero asks if there are still people in the city, to which Lee replies that there probably are. While it makes sense that the military wouldn't be the only survivors, this leaves Shin a bit uneasy. This is why they decided to leave in search of resources and to grow their forces. Just as the first group joined the unit, they need to expand through survival efforts. However, if the military starts accepting survivors without any criteria, criminals could infiltrate. This naturally gives the hero a massive headache. At one point during their journey, Lee senses something and immediately asks the group to wait. Shin asks what it is, and she says she hears faint breathing nearby, likely coming from zombies. Upon closer inspection, the soldiers confirm the presence of zombies, though fortunately, they haven't been noticed. Without the captain, they would be in serious trouble as the unit still lacks detailed information. Lee explains that most zombies are weaker than monsters but can retain human habits or exhibit unpredictable behaviors. One example is a zombie moving within the sewer system. She explains that the zombie is hiding to ambush anyone who comes close, like a trap. The hero asks if there's a way to detect them beforehand. Lee explains that with the heightened hearing of the awakened, it's possible to recognize breathing if one concentrates. Shin realizes that hearing is the only method, so he begins to think about devising a strategy. A few minutes later, the hero briefs the unit on everything he has learned. Calling for focus, he orders everyone to gather equipment and prioritize large swords. Since it will be complicated for everyone to move together, only the captain and a few others will join the vanguard group, while the rest will secure the barracks area. With everything prepared, the protagonist orders his group to move, and they quickly enter the location. Inside one of the buildings, the members are split into two groups. Before advancing further, they hear the sound of zombie breathing coming from all directions. Hyun, slightly worried, notes that there are too many of them, making it difficult to pinpoint their positions. Lee adds that she has never seen so many zombies gathered in one place in her entire life. And to make matters worse, Shin's former superiors are among the monsters. Realizing that the mission seems too risky, the hero decides it's better to retreat, and Hyun agrees. However, just as Shin is about to order Kwang to lead the way, a zombie comes flying straight at the young officer. The zombie nearly ends his life, but fortunately, a knife pierces its neck. Everyone is shocked because the one who reacted so quickly was the hero himself. Shin then shouts for everyone to move quickly as the zombies are coming en masse. While being pursued, Shin warns them not to slow down. After all the chaos, the group successfully escapes the base. But the fact that the zombie was in reality Sergeant Park, a standout officer from their battalion, draws significant attention. Shin explains that he recognized the zombie despite its altered form, as it's still possible to identify them. Hyung notes that despite everything, these were still the soldiers' former superiors, making it likely that fighting them could emotionally destabilize the troops. Reflecting on this, Shin remembers that it's been a long time since he prepared comforting and relaxing meals for his companions. Since the unit encountered Jamin and Sungdo on the road, the soldiers' fear of zombies has grown significantly. In this case, Shin mentioned that he considered investigating elsewhere, but ultimately decided they still needed to check the barracks. This decision, driven by mental health management, initially confuses everyone. The hero explains that while the soldiers' battles are temporary, there may still be survivors to save. Lee agrees, stating that such a mission would undoubtedly boost morale and courage. Hyun, however, still finds the plan a bit crazy. Shin explains that unlike aimless investigations, this rescue mission would have a meaningful purpose. After a lengthy discussion, the officers decide to hear out Shin's plan. The soldiers then begin strategizing on how to confront the monsters in the barracks. Given that these structures are essentially dungeons, the hero knows it won't be easy. Hyung suggests bringing all the mages to level the area with maximum firepower. Unexpectedly, the hero considers this as a plan B, but insists on first explaining plan A after everyone eats. While cooking, Shin thinks about how their combat abilities are not inferior to the zombies. However, a simple stat boost won't suffice in this situation, so he prepares a lavender ears. These are said to help determine the location of predators and prey, which should assist in understanding the zombies. Additionally, the meal is infused with calming emotions, and since it's made with magical ingredients, it has amplified effects. Sometime later, the soldiers eat the meal and are delighted by its taste, which they say resembles pork neck. All their stats increase by 5, and the magic of enhanced hearing is activated. One soldier calls everyone's attention to a strange feature in their status window. The others, annoyed by his shouting, quickly realize that no one is actually yelling. Temporarily, the soldiers gain heightened hearing, and before an argument breaks out, Shin realizes it's time to move out. Running through the city, the soldiers can now hear the zombies' movements before they arrive. This allows them to intercept the monsters with powerful attacks, leaving no room for defense. One soldier shouts about a zombie hiding in a wardrobe, while another urges him to lower his voice. Now the troops can pinpoint enemy locations solely by sound. Lee finds it almost unbelievable, though she notes that their ears hurt significantly. Shin suspects that their brain functions aren't fully prepared for the heightened auditory sensitivity. Still, since these are only zombies, locating them is enough for the unit to handle them effectively, and at this rate, they'll finish quickly. Suddenly, a zombie appears without anyone noticing, but luckily, Shin defends against its attack. He drives a knife into the monster's head, causing it to fall lifelessly to the ground. Unexpectedly, some zombies begin attacking silently, prompting Shin to conclude that they've been there too long. He orders the group to move to the officers' building on the next floor. If everything goes well, the unit should complete the mission without further issues. Upon reaching the next floor, Shin is surprised to find Hyun already there. Hyun remarks that Shin is late, and Kwang reports that most of the monsters have already been dealt with. At this pace, a soldier comments that he almost feels sorry for the zombies because they have no combat skills. However, one still remains: the commander of the unit's battalion, Major Kwak Han-jung. Shin is obviously terrified to see the highest-ranking person in the unit in this state. Kwak was different from the indecisive Lieutenant Kim, being a soldier among soldiers, and everyone recognized his skill as the commander. Thus, the hero announces that he wants to personally bid farewell to the battalion commander. Everyone agrees, as it is Shin's responsibility as the master of the Steel Legion Guild to handle this. Despite some hesitation, the hero draws his blade and begins approaching the monster. The fight between the two begins, with the Major initiating the attacks. Shin quickly realizes that the Major's spirit is entirely different from the other zombies. Nevertheless, the hero manages to defeat him with surprising ease in a single move. Even in a situation like this, Shin vows never to forget the military spirit the commander showed them. Thus, after decapitating the monster, he commits himself to building this guild under the commander's legacy. He promises to transform it into a powerful organization and protect it at all costs. Later, with all the soldiers present, the unit holds a burial ceremony for their fallen comrades. With all the zombie bodies gathered, a fire cremates the monsters, and everyone is overwhelmed with sadness. This is because all those who perished were excellent soldiers and great friends. The hero bids farewell to his companions, wishing them peace. Now that the funeral is over, he advises everyone to focus on the survivors moving forward. Once the farewell is complete, work begins in earnest to transform the officers' quarters into a new temporary base. Hyung's group is tasked with completely erasing any trace of zombies from the site. Lee's group of survivors is sent to collect water from the nearby stream. Kwang's group is responsible for gathering wood and lighting torches before sunset. Lastly, the hero discusses with Siu-hyuk the need to create a defensive perimeter similar to the one at the base. As outlined on the map, ensuring the line of sight for the mages and shooters is the top priority. Thus, they decide to start immediately. Later, Shin announces that he would love to hold a party like the one they had before leaving the base, but explains that it isn't feasible yet. He turns to the group and acknowledges their disappointment, understanding the necessity of leisure. But the critical work begins now, and the military must decide on the guild's next destination. At this point, Hyun taps the hero on the shoulder to take charge of this part. Hyun states that, as everyone knows, the battalion came here to expand, but for now, they lack even the resources to survive. He presents a list detailing everything the unit currently needs. One soldier, however, raises a question about the lack of food, pointing out that they collected plenty of meat since arriving. The soldier is clearly correct, but Shin explains that meat alone isn't enough to sustain a healthy body. The hero is uncertain about how powerful the mana present in the bodies of the awakened is. It's unclear whether it can maintain health despite a lack of proper nutrients. Hyung suggests they might survive on meat for a month, but there's no telling what will happen after that. That's not all. They're also running out of fuel and ammunition, both essential for obvious reasons. Thus, Hyun declares that this is the time for everyone to share ideas on how to solve these issues. At this point, Corporal Lee Gong-woo raises his hand to offer a suggestion. He proposes that the military needs to secure more crafting materials. The idea sparks some confusion, prompting Kwang to ask for clarification. Nevertheless, Gong-woo firmly believes that securing such materials will be helpful. Reflecting on this, the hero recalls wanting to collect materials in the past for vehicle repairs. Shin acknowledges that with resources, they could have salvaged some of the vehicles they had to discard. Recognizing Gongwoo's expertise as a combat engineer, the hero directs him to explain his plan to the rest of the group. Gongwoo's argument is convincing, but the challenge remains that fuel and food are more urgent needs. However, the idea of securing easily accessible materials to enable safe movement is also valuable. The discussion shifts toward fabricating and modifying war machines. Vehicles, protected from overloading by monsters, could be enhanced with upgrades such as spiked barriers. And Hyun agrees because if the vehicles were reinforced, they wouldn't need to move so cautiously. In this case, Shin asks if the combat engineer can make such modifications, and the corporal replies that given enough time, yes. In a way, combat engineers are also responsible for this type of production, which essentially involves armoring vehicles. If Shin's predictions are correct, production work in this game is more powerful than expected. In any case, the hero warns that he will reject the idea if the corporal merely wants to test his skills. But Gongwoo stands by his suggestion, believing it's the most important step at the moment. Thus, the hero states that it's enough and tells the corporal to do his best. While other needs remain, Shin is convinced that this is the priority for now. At the end of the day's activities, the hero announces that he will share their decisions later, and everyone is dismissed to rest. Later, Shin lights a fire to cook and thinks he'll need help from the others to arrange the tables. The mess hall in the barracks is useless without electricity and running water, but this workaround will suffice for dinner. Thus, Shin begins with the monster fat he collected. Though edible, the smell of it cooking is unbearable. This is animal fat mixed with manna, which when used in cooking, adapts to the dish's manna. To the hero, this ingredient is the most powerful in the culinary world, as it makes anything fried taste delicious. Once ready, the result is simply the renowned cooking oil. In a meeting, Gongwoo mentions a large hardware warehouse near the police quarters, prompting Hyun to ask how the corporal knows about it. The soldier explains that at times the base urgently needed crafting materials, so that's where he went. Thus, Hyun asks if the corporal is suggesting they source materials from there. Gongwoo confirms, saying that being a spacious area, it should have most of the materials they need. This location is near the barracks but somewhat removed from urban areas, making Shin think it might have fewer zombies. Pleased with the idea, Hyun commends the corporal, and both he and Shin believe it's a good opportunity. Thus, the hero orders Kwon to prepare the troops. They'll advance in the same teams, but with a combat engineer assigned to each. Additionally, Gongwoo is tasked with bringing a well-conditioned vehicle to the front of the quarters. Hyun questions the risks of driving, but the hero insists there's no other option. They need to transport supplies, but Shin assures they'll proceed as cautiously as possible. Later, trouble arises and the hero asks how many are injured. It's reported that there are 3 injuries, though thankfully, none are serious. With the injured out of immediate danger, Shin orders treatment to proceed and Kwon to secure the path. Currently, the soldiers are moving at maximum speed and Gongwoo continues to press the accelerator. The guild has minimized combat noise as much as possible, but they couldn't anticipate all the damage. As expected, traveling the roads remains perilous, though monsters often compete among themselves for prey. Unfortunately, this differs from zombies, which move as though avoiding altered food sources. With the same formation as before, the warriors clear a path for the truck. Upon arrival, the soldiers realize the warehouse is indeed enormous. Inside, however, it seems likely to be empty and Shin decides it's best to move quickly. Thus, he orders Lee's team to guard the warehouse entrance. Meanwhile, the combat engineers explain to the soldiers which supplies are needed. The rest are tasked with heavy lifting, starting with a rousing order from the hero. But unexpectedly, upon reaching the entrance, everyone is shocked to see the warehouse in disarray. Despite the mess, Shin assures the team that their goal is simply to grab the materials and leave. He also orders the soldiers to keep the entrance clear to move the items to the truck. First, seal plates are collected, though many scattered on the ground require extra care to transport. However, as the soldiers organize the supplies, a strange noise echoes through the area. Both the combat engineer and others hear it. The sound suggests something is in the storage area, prompting Shin to command everyone to prepare for battle. The soldiers draw their weapons and rush to face the threat, but suddenly, the metal plates begin to move, and everyone is terrified by this. A dark energy is swirling behind the warehouse, pulling in the metal plates. Slowly, they begin to fuse, forming something much larger. It becomes clear that this is actually a massive monster that had been hiding. The beast roars, and the sheer force of the sound is enough to make the soldiers realize the monster's incredible strength. Neither Kwon nor the others have ever seen a monster like this before, leaving the surgeons visibly shaken. But, having overcome so much already, the hero believes in their victory and orders the soldiers into battle positions. The roar is so powerful that it shatters the warehouse windows, and Lee, stationed at the gate, cannot stand idle. As she runs toward the commotion, she wonders just how large the monster is, but upon seeing it, she realizes it's worse than she imagined. With a single blow, the monster takes down 5 soldiers, prompting Hyung to shout for them to use the dried meat. Kwon, meanwhile, engages in direct combat, but since the beast's body is made of iron plates, his attacks have no effect. With relentless strikes, the beast continues to brutally defeat the soldiers. Even the buffs from the hero's meals fail to help the troops. In the end, the monster is far stronger than Shin anticipated. The beast attacks from all directions, shaking the ground with its force. As soldiers are flung aside, the hero realizes that if this continues, it will be annihilated. Shin decides to use the monster bait, which had worked well during their descent from the mountain. But when he throws it at the monster, it simply discards all the dried meat. In shock, the hero questions what went wrong and whether the monster found the food unappealing. Hyun quickly warns that they cannot handle this and must retreat immediately. The hero agrees and orders everyone to withdraw slowly to avoid being attacked from behind. The injured are prioritized for entry into the vehicles. As they flee, the hero silently vows to make the monster regret wasting so much of his food. Fortunately, the monster doesn't pursue them, likely bound to its territory. Nevertheless, the soldiers are in a dire situation and need to return as quickly as possible. Back at the camp, one of them suggests abandoning the idea of collecting materials altogether. They argue it isn't worth sacrificing soldiers for something like this. Kwang agrees but asks if the hero was able to identify any weaknesses in the monster. The hero says yes, but defeating it this time will be far more challenging. Lee, curious, asks about the visible weakness. The system revealed that the beast uses metal plates to shield its abdomen, which is more vulnerable than the rest of its body. To exploit this, it would need to remove the metal covering to access the dark core beneath. However, it's also true that these materials aren't urgently needed and could be sourced elsewhere. Despite this, Shin is deeply irritated by the situation, particularly that the monster refused to eat the bait despite being carnivorous. Since the beast is a living organism, it must consume something, but the hero doesn't yet understand why it rejected the bait. The corporal suggests that the monster might feed on metal itself, prompting the others to ask him to elaborate. The soldier explains that there are bite marks on the scattered metal pieces. Surprised, the commanders ask if he's certain. The corporal confirms, explaining that engineers have ways of identifying alterations in materials, and these marks were caused by rust. Even so, Hyung struggles to comprehend how a monster could eat metal. At this moment, the hero formulates an idea to solve the problem. With leftover oil in hand, Shin suggests frying the metal plates to see if that improves their appeal. The others find the notion bizarre, doubting it would make the metal taste any better. Regardless, they cannot defeat the beast in direct combat and need to try something before retreating. The corporal agrees, reasoning that the more methods they try to entice the monster, the better. Thus, the plan is decided, and Shin orders a well-preserved metal plate to be brought to him. Later, the hero begins cooking the material, frying the iron while seething at the memory of what the beast had done. Then the system informs that the metal plate was infused with magic and the cook's sense of defeat. Additionally, Shin becomes the first human to explore a new frontier in the culinary world. It is said that even the most renowned chefs rarely attempt to cook something unconventional, and many pass away without trying to reach a new level. But not Shin, as he now receives a pioneer's reward. This reward, called the ingredient limit break, leaves Shin pleasantly surprised. Using the corporal's material identification skill, it's confirmed that the iron plate did not become stronger. Instead, its efficiency significantly decreased to an almost useless level. Therefore, it won't reinforce the iron plate as Shin had hoped, and Hyun thinks the plan has failed. Unexpectedly, Gongwoo disagrees, claiming this is actually an incredible achievement. To him, the act of frying metal in oil and transforming the material entirely is almost miraculous. Upon reflection, the surgeon agrees, while Shin remarks that perhaps he should stop experimenting with cooking. Suddenly, a soldier arrives to inform them that they are ready to move forward. With that, the hero decides to begin the operation. Most soldiers don't know that Shin's meals can alter emotions. It's not wise to let his power become public knowledge. Regarding the altered iron plate, Shin considers it a mere debuff for now. And this time, the monster will definitely not resist. Back at the warehouse, the metal plates begin moving again. The first time, the soldiers were confused by the chaos, but it seems the monster uses objects to form a body. It only does this when enemies are near, so everyone remains highly alert. At the center of the metal plates lies the core, a dark shadow shielded by the iron pieces. Without wasting time, Shin throws the crispy iron plate toward the beast. Suddenly, it stops moving and falls to the ground, leaving everyone puzzled. Moments later, the monster creates an opening and begins pulling the metal plate into its core, surprising Shin at how smoothly it worked. The hero hopes the monster enjoys its meal. Outside, Lee, who is guarding the perimeter, remarks on the eerie silence. Inside, the beast dismantles its armor to enjoy the meal. Despite the plan working, everyone finds the monster's true form oddly cute. However, Hyung asks why Shin is so calm, to which the hero explains that the dish's special effect is defeat. At this moment, the monster is just a trembling, weak creature overwhelmed by a sense of defeat. Satisfied with the plan, Hyun urges Shin to finish it. But before he does, Gongwoo interrupts, saying there's something urgent they must see. The corporal shows them a unique iron plate, which Shin analyzes with his chef's eye. The system reveals that the Mac monster's iron plate is reinforced with magic, and despite its high quality, is not recommended for cooking due to hygiene concerns. Even so, Shin is impressed that the system recognizes the plate as an ingredient. Gongwoo points out that this isn't an ordinary metal plate, as it has been reinforced with the monster's magic. Hyun realizes why their attacks weren't effective, and Gongwoo notes how fascinating it is that the effects remain after being separated from the beast. The reinforced iron blade could be very useful for the military, prompting Gongwoo to ask if there's a way to keep the monster alive. Naturally, the group struggles to agree on simply sparing the creature. While Shin understands their concerns, he also acknowledges the danger of leaving the monster unchecked. Currently, the beast is calm, but there's no telling when it might attack again. However, Gongwoo insists that this trait could lead to incredible creations. Shin deliberates on what to do. The corporal suggests securing the monster in a safe location to preserve these valuable materials. Hyun asks for Shin's opinion and whether he's willing to pass up this opportunity. Making Gongwoo ecstatic, Shin decides not to let it slip away. Excited, the soldiers act quickly, successfully capturing the monster in a cage within seconds. Then Shin announces that Mac will stay there from now on and that no metal pieces are nearby, which makes the monster furious. At another time, the engineers analyze the metals obtained through the monster and realize they are much stronger than usual. Naturally, they get very excited, and Shin thinks this is excellent. Gongwoo, on the other hand, thanks them for trusting him and prioritizing the acquisition of materials. With his task there complete, Shin allows the corporal to proceed with his plan and do his best. During construction, the system identifies several low-level cooking materials. Shin gets excited again as everything is being revealed as potential ingredients. If the engineer's identification trait works only on materials, Shin's is superior and limitless. Thus, he thinks that if he uses it with his chef's eye, which identifies weaknesses, they will be able to handle any monster they encounter. A few days later, the modifications are finally completed and Gongwoo asks the superiors what they think. The results are so impressive that everyone is speechless. The truck, now equipped with horns, prompts one soldier to compare it to something out of Mad Max. Although the design is unusual, the engineer assures them it will perform well, and Shin sees no problem with that. Getting straight to the point, the corporal explains that the vehicle can be used for driving and combat, and that the side spikes can easily destroy monsters, except for the recent steel monster they encountered, which the protagonist acknowledges. The engineer asks them to think of the truck as both a barricade and a tank. Additionally, with acoustic insulation, they will reduce noise, which makes Shin very pleased with the progress. Changing the subject, Hyun asked about Mac, and the corporal reports that he is fine. For now, the team is monitoring and feeding him, and he doesn't seem to transform, with just a few metal plates nearby. Furthermore, the iron plates Mac consumes are reinforced with magic, which is great for the guild. Whenever a metal plate is fed to the monster, it gets reinforced. Currently, the reinforcement process is slow, but the engineers are trying to improve it, hoping to eventually build a wall. While the hero worries, Hyun thinks it's a good idea. Later, the commanders locate a convenience store near the border. Lee suggests sending the new vehicle there, but Shin points out that they will need supplies. Hyun admits they can't just stay idle and suggests trying something, with Lee being the first to agree, though uncertain if they will find anything useful. Since it's close by, Shin agrees that it's not a bad idea and prepares to leave. In front of the convenience store, everyone is impressed with the truck's performance. Its first run was incredibly smooth, and the vehicle shredded most monsters to pieces. Still, the soldiers will have to clean off all the blood and flesh, and the corporal admits he didn't think about that. Shin reminds them to stay focused and eat military ration number 3. While the soldiers toast, Shin reflects on the convenience of assigning numbers based on a dish's effect. This dried meat has the effect of enhancing sensitive hearing, so the soldiers enter the store highly alert. As the group split up, each begins searching the shelves for supplies. Unfortunately, they find nothing, but to be sure, Shin decides to search a bit more. At this moment, a soldier calls the surgeon's attention, reporting a zombie corpse nearby. The condition of the wound suggests it was struck in the head with an axe. It seems some survivor in the area handled it. Suddenly, a strange sound is heard by everyone, leaving the entire group on edge. Quickly, Shin orders his colleagues not to move, and carefully listening to his surroundings, a hero detects something inside the store. The sound is definitely coming from the butcher's section. It's clear the noise is being muffled, as if someone is trying to hide their presence. Assuming it might be a monster setting up an ambush, the unit cautiously approaches the area. Then Kwon uses all of his strength to break down the gate, completely destroying it. Behind him, our hero also advances, activating his chef's eye. Because even though he doesn't know what type of monster it is, identifying its weakness could mean defeating it. It would be like a piece of meat prepared to be sliced or a dish ready to be cooked. But unexpectedly, the system only identifies the presence of a human. With no other choice, the person reveals herself, a girl trying to protect her younger brother. In the past, a group of survivors arrived at this market along with supplies, but they couldn't carry everything and felt it was wasteful to leave them behind. Faced with this, a woman warned them to leave quickly because it was dangerous to stay there. Even though their backpacks were filled with everything they could carry, one of them suggested hiding the remaining items. However, the girl was more concerned about leaving quickly, as they could return later. The two men were a bit disappointed, and one of them called Sion and her brother to leave. But just as they were about to go, something appeared, destroying everything and causing massive damage. Some of the men were slashed and others were thrown far away. The man with the ponytail ran and shouted for Sion to flee, warning her about the strange creature that had appeared. Initially, neither Sion nor her brother understood what was happening, but the man kept insisting that they run immediately. Before he could explain the situation further, the creature tore him apart right in front of the siblings. In shock, Soyeon grabbed her brother by the arm and ran without looking back. While all of her companions were being killed by the monster, she and her brother remained hidden, trying not to make any noise. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tab's channel.